Imagine waking up every single day with life trapped under fluorescent lights, stuck in a hospital bed for your entire life, craving nothing but a quiet, normal life. No drama, no chaos, just peace. Then bam, you die and jolt awake in a whole new world. That sounds amazing, doesn't it? But this world is packed to the brim with monsters. Survival is brutal as hell, and the only edge he's got, just a handful of bonus skills he's holding back. He basically talked his way into striking a deal with a goddess. But right when the forest turns deadly and danger starts closing in fast, he bolts into the alleyway that nobody could have predicted. Literally anything. So the chaos summon goes off a beer ferry. All right, let's dive in and see how this whole wild ride plays out. The tale kicks off with a grim-faced man staring her down, warning that if she won't do what he demands, he'll refuse to be reborn. He floated in ghost form beside his body sprawled on a hospital bed, and Spirit, still totally confused, went quiet for a second, then nodded along to his condition. Just minutes earlier, he'd stared at the sky in shock and blurted, "Reincarnation in another world, is that for real?" And she confirmed it, telling him he needed to be glad, because once this summoning, the choice landed on him, and he thought his name was Yuri Asari. After a brutal battle with illness, he took his own life at just 37 years old. He believed this was the plan until a so-called goddess showed up and promised him rebirth in another world. And he quickly asked, one thing would she keep sending chosen people to other worlds to handle the mess? She told them to settle in, then handed out power after power because she loves dealing with people who get things fast. Then he asked if he could pick his own abilities. And she said yes after that. She grinned and asked whether he wanted to become an unbeatable hero or use charm to build a harem. He shot the idea down and swore he'd always dreamed of a peaceful life out in nature, so why not help him live day to day, not chase war? She nodded fast, thinking she'd gotten away with it way too easily. When his demands finally piled past 10, should he? She started to sweat with nerves, stared at his demands in disbelief, then blurted out, "Are you asking for too much?" But the test proved it. He wasn't a villain. All right, then she'd hand him every wish he dared dream of, and even the strength to survive it. He couldn't help but feel relieved, and then he surged toward the light and felt it. This had to be the start of his second life, bursting with hope. Sometime later, in the new world, he bolted away from a massive boar and shouted at full volume, asking, "What the hell is this? Where'd this massive eyesore come from? It's the size of an SUV." And then he froze, thinking. He couldn't stand the idea that he'd start a whole new life just to have it end right here, no joke at all. And now he had to find some way to reach that abandoned village the goddess had warned him about. He snapped his head around, caught a flash of memory, and grinned like he owned the moment. Sure as hell he had the skill for this. With that invisibility skill, he suddenly realized what he needed. Then he sprinted harder and yelled, begging for instructions on how to even activate him. He shut his eyes, fear smashing through him, and prayed it would work. Invisibility. Activate. The moment the skill activated, power surged through him and the effects hit hard. He clocked it, slipped into the bushes, and the boar immediately lost him, sniffing around like it never saw a thing. He stared in shock, realizing it had actually happened. Then he blinked and lost track of him completely. So this is how it works. And it felt like he'd blended into the scenery so fully it was like he vanished. Now, it was time to break free before it was too late. He cowered in the forest, lungs burning and breathing hard, swearing it was terrifying. And honestly, it's a good thing he's healthy now. He stared into a puddle, saw himself shockingly younger, and just like that, he looked exactly like an ordinary elementary school kid. So he had to figure everything out fast. Stories like this always come with some kind of status. Screen 2. Maybe even right here. He shot his hands up and boom, a glowing system window popped right in front of him, stunning him so hard he blurted, "This is incredible." It's exactly like a video game, he realized. He realized his last name had somehow turned into Sarai, and he blurted out that even the goddess messed up. Then he sat there at 7 years old, while the goddess shrugged that, from her side of the story, it was still within the margin of error. He caught the mistake and immediately dove into what was happening with the skills he'd been handed. Then he scanned everything from level 1 through level 5 and said it all. Everything set, no fear, just pure nerve. They say impudence is second happiness, and with that kind of arsenal, he'll make it, even if the electricity goes out. He's itching to try it all at once, but the second monsters clock him, it's game over. He's got to keep training the second he's safe because right now he'll slip through as a ghost, but if he crashes into something huge again. But some fights are so brutal that sprinting won't save him. He needs a real strategy because his magic isn't built for combat. A cleaver won't cut it against monsters like that. He's got nothing but a working cleaver, and that's it. If he doesn't map his plan to the very last detail, this trip ends with him no second chances. His stomach growled like a warning, and when he peeked into his bag, he admitted he had only a single hand's worth of food, a handful of hazelnuts. That won't cut it, so he had to master magic, ward off wild animals, hunt for food, and secure a safe spot to sleep. All in one day. Turns out the road to peace in the wild is way more brutal than he ever imagined. Then, after a while, he spots buildings and blurts, "Wait, is this the village?" He burst into the village, scanning every corner, and declared, "This land's perfect for farming, and since there's no one here, we won't get hit with any extra trouble." The best part, we've got a place to hide, no question. Everything was exactly how he asked. Turns out the goddess didn't lie at all. Yet the buildings are falling apart, crumbling into ruins. Turns out everyone had packed up and vanished from this place ages ago. He has to check every last thing here, minimum gear, clothes, food, and shelter. And he's got plenty of clothes, but the rest has to be grabbed before sunset. So he barrels through the village and spots a house that's pretty, less intact. He slipped inside and shouted that the walls were falling apart. The walls were tough, but a quick repair turned the whole place into somewhere you could finally live. The house sat dead center, giving them the perfect fortress position and room to grow. Once the housing problem was handled, all he had left was food, and without hunting, he wouldn't make it much longer. Then he stumbled on potatoes and wheat just lying nearby. And then he snapped that the crops had gone feral, but somehow they all fought through it and lived. He cleaned up the field and swore a real harvest was coming. Then he paused. Wait, is this even edible? What if it's poisonous? He snapped his fingers like it clicked and opened the system window. And he said, "I've got a rating," then used that skill straight on the potatoes and wheat. And the system came back with a green light. It was edible. Safe enough to swallow without causing trouble. This skill is insanely useful. And they told me if you plant it right, no matter what, there'd barely be any food left. Just some old wheat sitting in the bins, collecting dust for who knows how long. And he's got zero clue how long it's been there. And he refuses to risk his health. He watched a video of birds getting snared with grain and joked, maybe they'll bite back. Then he leaned over the fence, saw them pecking the bait, and thought, wait, if I bait them first, they'll crawl right into the snares. Totally forgot one thing. He did have fire magic, but it was pretty weak, and blasting a bird with a spell might. Suddenly, he snapped to attention when someone shouted a warning to him that would have made everything so much easier. He felt danger closing in, started scanning the room like crazy, and demanded to know where it was coming from and where the threat was hiding. He looked. He spun around and spotted a massive boar roaring in every breath, locking eyes with him like it wanted to fight. Panic hit him the second he saw it. He shouted, "Tell me you really tracked it back by..." A sharp scent hit him, and just as the boar lunged, he sprang aside and dodged the strike at the last second. He fired up his invisibility skill and vanished behind hidden cover, ready to strike. And he knew he was one slip away from getting caught. So now the real question hit, what was he supposed to do next? "You run again!" He heard those terrifying loud noises crashing in. He peered out and blurted, stunned, like, wait, that's all it is. He smashed those houses to pieces, then roared at the top of his lungs for it to stop. And then he realized if he bolted right now, he'd burn this whole place down just like that. Because he had nowhere to live. So if he made a move, could he actually stop it with just the smallest amount of force before everything fell apart? They handed it to him, an ordinary boar, of all things. That's terrifying. And that monster was an absolute tank. Nothing he had could even come close to it. Would he really have to rip himself away from this village and give up this fast? Quickly, because this world was treacherous. And if you didn't keep your eyes on what was behind you, you wouldn't make it back. And there wasn't a single promise that when he sprinted off, a better place would even be waiting for him. And even if he slipped away, the boar would still come charging after him, no doubt about it. He'd probably see him as a trespasser, barging into his turf, so yeah, he'd have to strike back. And they were both stuck in the exact same position. Rival factions battled for their shot at glory. He'd always craved a free life out in the wild, but there was no way through it. He had to face the wild head-on, because living free only works when he's ready to take responsibility for himself. He had to face his own mess. No excuses. Then he burst out from behind the cover and declared he'd stay in this world and never fold the second an obstacle shows up. He kicked off with his first level fire magic and blasted straight at a hulking boar. Then out of nowhere, an earth-shaking explosion ripped through everything. He smirked like he owned the place and bragged that it's pretty much just like this roughly. What would happen if he got tossed into a totally classic isekai right in the middle of all that chaotic fantasy action? Action movie. He kept his eyes on the fight from behind cover, heart slamming as he realized his body hadn't hidden at all. It had frozen in pure fear. And then his power. His powers were nothing more than the bare minimum, so with that kind of loadout, he could barely do anything, even though this magic had been handed to him. The goddess bestowed it on him, so maybe it was stronger than it looked, because the power behind the effectiveness of the but the invisibility skill's power turned out to be insane once he activates it. Even a boar with that killer sense of smell can't sniff him out. He can't smell it, so he has to trust this power, believe in himself, and prove he can turn the fantasies of every sofa hero into reality. Warmth surged through him. Rage and fear churned inside his chest, but he clenched his teeth. He could take it. Then he lifted his hands, ready to act. He lifted his hand with pure confidence and launched into a spell, unleashing his first level fire magic like a match striking into flame. A tiny flame burst from his hand and crashed to the ground. And right away he bolted outside, panic chewing at him, demanding, "Tell me this can't be true. Did it really fail?" The moment he tried it for the first time, a boar stormed up and huffed at him like pure rage. Then he froze, trembling hard. Shaking with sheer terror, he blurted out that they'd finally spotted him and that he'd been noticed and realized he had to switch gears fast, so he started experimenting with something new right away. He unleashed a bunch of basic magic right away, but this beast didn't even flinch. He bolted away from the enraged boar and shouted that he needed a different plan. He snapped around and unleashed his thorough. Earth magic surged through him, and he slammed together a massive wall of earth that looked unreal. It felt like this was his best shot to slow it down just a bit. The monster slammed its huge head into the wall right away, shattering it with terrifying ease. Then it kept going. The shock hit him hard until he saw the monster jammed in that gap, and it clicked. This was the chain he'd been trapped by all along. Chance, he yanked out his knife and said, "If magic fails, don't worry, there's still the good old kind." Method. He figured he had to strike right where the hunters and slaughterers were aiming. He tightened his focus on the throat. Now we can finally reach it, and there won't be no other chance. He's terrified, shaking with fear. Can he pull it off with that trembling hand shaking everything at stake? If he drops the shot, it's game over for him. So why did he still decide to survive in this world? No matter what fate threw at him, he pushed through anyway. He stared down the monster, threw a prayer up to the heavens, and admitted he never thought it would be over this fast. So what's he going to do with his carcass now? He acted like he'd studied slaughter techniques in some old butcher's manual. He remembered you had to hang the animal, bleed it out, then dunk the carcass in water to cool it. But he just couldn't do that. He couldn't even hoist the thing, and the way he saw it, it would take an entire river to cool it down. He heard someone ask, "Do you need help?" And it snapped his focus dead in its tracks, because it was the very same voice that had warned him about the boar. So he had to show himself right then. A bird wheeled overhead and shouted that they were right up here above him, then swooped closer to tell him, "This is the first time we've ever seen someone who actually understands our language." It was like he'd maxed that skill out, and he stood there staring as he asked, "So was this the skill that made it all click?" He figured it was what he needed to talk to people in this world, but then it blew his mind even more. It let him understand animals too. He tried to talk to the boar, but of course it wouldn't work. They were enemies. Still, next time, maybe he could try speaking before the hunt if the animal didn't start. Screaming in pain, the hunt would have turned into a nightmare, so one of the birds asked if he should show him where the river was. It felt weird, but he nodded anyway, saying it would help a lot. The birds peeled off to the side and pointed out a big river, right there and super close. He thanked them and promised he'd remember. Then he snapped, "Wait, why are you helping me?" They told him they were grateful for the food. Sure, it was a little old, but it still tasted great to them. They loved it. "So this is payback for that handful of wheat?" he asked. The birds said their goodbyes and took off. He thanked them too, relieved he didn't have to hunt them. Then he tried to move the boar's body and asked, "Is the river close?" But honestly, how was he even supposed to carry it there? Because he'd demanded a way to transfer objects, so this was the only step left to make it happen. Projects, just like in games, he spotted them inside the system screen. You had to touch that window because the storage skill wouldn't work unless you made contact, and the icon lit up. He hit the skill the moment it activated. And the boar's way. War's body ballooned into a huge bubble, then surged forward like it had a mission. He shoved it into storage, then stared at his inventory and said, "This is a whole other dimension where time freezes so the meat won't rot." That massive carcass barely took up any room. Straight up cheating, but he couldn't help loving it. Hope flared in his chest. Then he bolted for the river, ready to hit the invisibility skill the moment he got there. Just in case. He stumbled to the riverbank, sure he'd already bled out on the shore. Then figured, it's liquid, so magic and water will fix me. And he dove in to wash up. Washes it all away in one brutal, powerful blast of water. Somehow, he slit the prey wide open and shoved it under the rushing water. Then he dropped to the ground and asked, like he couldn't stop thinking about it, whether he was so tired maybe from all that time around mannequins. By the way, he could totally read the status screen. In the status window, magic sat at 51 out of 100, and health roared at 80 out of 100, and when he saw it, he couldn't even tell what he was supposed to think next. No matter how you slice it, the numbers looked way too small. So small, it made him doubt everything. If he could win against this monster, even with those stats, then that week was way off and his entire assessment was dead wrong. The numbers he'd checked, especially his mana, looked dangerously low, but they were already spiking past normal, and the beast he just slaughtered wasn't some easy target, it was a forest boss. Most warriors couldn't survive. Yet he was bleeding. Washing the carcass away with water magic demanded razor-precise control. He had terrifying strength already, but it wouldn't show up for a while yet. Then, after a stretch of work, he finally hauled himself back to the village. Back in the village, he declared, "Good news, dinner's handled," and the assessment backed it up, no infections, no parasites anywhere. Then he slammed out an earth-bending stove from the ground, messy, crooked, and barely holding it together. It was more than enough. He snapped into action with fire bending, blazing the kindling he'd loaded into the stove like a match striking, and that was just the start. This Temper's golden rule is simple: never strike a flame on bare ground, protect the soil, or you'll wreck it. They pulled the meat off the fire, stared at it in awe, and then blurted out, said that the moment he got the food from the hospital, he finally got real meat in his hands, something he hadn't seen in ages. He dug in, and the moment he killed that boar, it hit him. He instantly decided this would be his very first. He finally got a real proper dinner in this world, but for all this time, he'd been ignoring his hunger like it didn't matter. He saved the potatoes and the grain, and at last, boom, a real masterpiece. The thrill of the hunt, then that meal outside in the fresh air. Just imagine how delicious could it possibly be. He took a tiny bite, shouted that it was insanely delicious, and then right after he burst into tears. He said there wasn't a trace of the animal's smell, just tender meat with a good amount of fat, and with every bite the flavor kept exploding wider and wider until you could practically feel nature's raw power hit your chest. No spices, just fire and pure flavor. And I swear it tasted insanely good, seriously. He'd never tasted anything like this in his whole life then. At last, he felt real, like he was waking up from a blur. Ever since he arrived, it was all fog. But now, every cell sparked with flavor right as Yuri finished. Right after he finished eating, he sprang to his feet and announced that the first problem with the supplies was finally solved. Now they had to race to set up a shelter before darkness fell. He whipped out a stick, scratched the dirt, and told himself right then that if he wanted to stop monsters from devouring him while he slept, he'd have to write. He'd have to. They'd hit him like that straight from the start because that was the whole plan. And yeah, it was exactly right. He stood by the house staring at it like a problem he could solve 100 different ways and started plotting wall designs in his head. Maybe he should tear down that creepy abandoned house and rebuild it into a solid wooden fence. Nope, there's no way he could pull that off. Not with all the time it would take and not with the tools he had or nails to drive it home for real strength, then stacking stones like a true fortress. Because that was a bad move, too slow, too risky. In the end, only one door stayed open and the fastest path looked clear. Earth magic. But even then, worry gnawed at him because he blasted right through that old barrier. Then he'd have to clear the small stones and debris from the soil. His power surged with every rep, just a bit of practice, and he dove into training until he finally pulled off a smooth mud. He grinned and said, "The first sample looked awful, but the last one came out perfectly smooth, and it's rock hard, like real stone." Turns out that kind of density can be a hum. They pulled this off without firing a single shot. This isn't ordinary ceramics anymore. It's like a magically forged monolith materialized out of nothing. It's just like pottery. If you want greatness, you don't rush the fire. You perfect the clay first, because that early prep is everything. With a flick of magic, he shattered the ground loose, yanked out every root and stones grinding into the mix until the whole thing was kneaded to perfection. It has to be molded with precision, or everything falls apart. He cracked open his magic and forged a silky wall, grinning like he'd just built art smooth, perfect, and roughly 5 meters long, 3 meters tall, and half a meter thick, and anyone trying to break through that thing is in for a brutal fight. Now he has to crank out 3 more of these, stacking them just right so they fully cage the whole house. He wrapped up building the walls around his house, then leaned in and declared, this was his fortress. He whipped his head around and felt. Sadness hit him hard. Was this place a prison? No mana meant no door. So he'd have to wait while his power slowly refilled. If he ever needed out, he could just dissolve part of the wall. Darkness was creeping in, so he called it time to finish for today. But there was still one last emergency waiting to explode. Left, gulping water as he went so locked in on the construction that he couldn't even finish the thought. He totally forgot about it, and he should have handled the water first. First, while he was out exploring he scouted the village and spotted a well, because if he was the kind of worker who could draw water there, he wouldn't have to sprint to the river every single time. He grabbed his drinking water, then realized he needed fresh regular water too, so he yanked open the well and blurted out that the bottom dropped deep. At first, it wasn't obvious whether he'd even found anything worth testing, so he grabbed a stone, threw it, and listened for the sound, just to be sure. I heard it smack the water, then blurted, "Okay, how am I supposed to get any water?" That rusty crane was busted, and he didn't have a bucket, so he had to pray that magic would save him. He caught sight of him again, and even though he swore he wouldn't waste a single bit of energy today, it still happened. Day broke, and he pictured the water climbing higher and higher, and it hung there, floating in the air. He hauled water from the well and swore it was crystal clean. Even the assessment backed it up still, just in case you should still let it boil. He slumped by the stove, wiped the exhaustion off his face, and said day one was way too packed with chaos. Even though it was still early, it was time to crash. He hadn't cleaned the house, there wasn't a scrap of bedding, so we shoved together a temporary bed out of leaves. Renovations are coming fast. First they'll finish the fence, lock down the garden, and finally tackle those nasty toilet problems. It still has to get sorted out somehow. He's got a mountain of things to handle, but man, it's so wonderful. Now he can forge anything. He dreams up plans are stacked so high his fingers are practically twitching. And he hasn't been this excited for tomorrow in what feels like forever. Next morning he jerked himself upright with a scowl so heavy it felt like it could crush the air. And he said, "Man, it's freezing here." His whole body screamed with pain. Those leaves weren't nearly enough. Nothing could shield him from the land's cold cruelty or the relentless damp soaking into the earth. Today's mission is crystal clear. He's got to craft a bed from boarhide, because nothing beats sound sleep when it comes to living. Right sounds simple, but it's brutal in practice, so can this amateur really pull off leather tanning? He needs to dig into his skills, then boom, he finds the answer. Right here, this is the unique skill guide to country life. These rare powers are only granted to the reborn, and even the status window is part of that gift. And the guide, just look at the name. It's supposed to pack every scrap of wisdom the whole village has. Honestly, that's a seriously huge bonus. I can't help but wonder if the system will spit out what I need when I ask all right. It's go time, Boar. Or he hid tanning first. They stripped the skin right off step 2. He scrubbed away every impurity period. Then he cut out the subcutaneous fob, plunged a knife in easy on the surface. But the next move is where it counts. Step 4 to stop spoilage. Soak the skin in a tanning solution. Solution that lasts 1 or 2 weeks. The recipe for the mixture of water and alum. And with a shake of salt, the main character just threw in the towel after reading it, muttering that he'd rather for now, just toss a few more leaves on the ground. Let him save all that energy for what's coming next. Or maybe he shifted focus to something else, scrubbing, cleaning, and rebuilding it from the ground up. The house just one level, and it's got only three. 3 rooms then, bare earth rips up the floor and lays a brand new one. And he didn't have a single tool at his disposal. Then he spotted a stove in the house and said that, so yeah, there'll be a kitchen here, and that room across from it turns into the dining area, while the far room becomes either a bedroom or a hall, and now it all clicks. The old people must have been sleeping on mats, but me, I'm used to real beds, and this place feels painfully wrong. His mana was fully Maitamelanema. The results sat there overnight. Now it's time to roll up his sleeves and get busy with home improvement. As he tapped into earth magic like he already knew exactly what he was doing. He nailed down the best spot and rebuilt the house, lifting it onto the foundation. Then he swore the surface turned smooth like real concrete. And honestly, it felt way better. Cooler than the dusty earth when he stepped inside. The rooms instantly chilled around him by the stove. He carefully laid out a slice of earth in the classic Japanese style, and the power of earth magic drove it home. This was the most important thing in the world. He was absolutely indispensable for fixing walls and forging utensils, and somehow he honed a level of skill with it that most people never even touch. Totally unaware that he'd become rare at it, after the renovation wrapped up, the real cleaning storm hit only he had no mop. So he blasted the debris away with wind magic and just kept going until... Meanwhile, he took in the spotless house with a smug little grin and casually said, by the way, it turns out quite nice now. The sky's fading and the night's calling. So he pushes through to the end tomorrow. He'll try making a candle out of animal fat. He grabs his bag of supplies, then stops dead because, wait, he still needs a bath and he's got to figure out what's going on with that toilet. For now, he skips the toilet, he stuffs it with leaves and buries the waste deep in the ground. The very next day, the status window lit up and that's when it broke him, sending him into helpless tears as he tried to decide what to do next. To dig deeper this list of stored items in the room, he had a dry ration tucked away, a flask, a cold-proof skin, a mana and health potion, a letter, and trophies from a magical wild boar. He sank into a hopeless voice and told everyone, from the very start, I've had food, water, and warm fur, and then everything hit a wall. Then a letter arrived written by the goddess herself, and it hit even harder. She revealed the world's name was Foa, warned him to keep his unique skills and their worth hidden from the locals, and left behind plenty more sharp instructions. But it wasn't that part that hit him hardest. It was the super detailed look at everyday magic, packed with tons of practical spells. Later on, he started cooking meat, then snapped in a disappointed tone that it felt like he'd spent all that effort on pure nonsense. Even back in his past life, he couldn't help it. He kept rage skimming past every intro and tutorial like they were nothing. And then he stared, amazed by features he'd never even noticed before. Though he's usually careful, he can also space out hard sometimes. So once the MSAO was done eating, he muttered that unseasoned fried meat is already too much to choke down. And he wondered if the village still had any salt left from the last owners, then decided to go hunting through the abandoned houses, because if he was still in the house, he'd search them anyway. If that goddess is really so generous, why didn't she toss him some spices too? He tore through the house, and then there was a map waiting for him. He stared at it and said he was relieved the map held together and didn't crumble into dust. Dust hung in the air, but the drawing was so awful that you could barely make out anything at all. That weird mark keeps crawling in his mind like it's watching him back. Is it a warning or a threat? A dangerous zone or maybe the jackpot, hiding a stash of priceless resources? He's got to slip out and scout the situation firsthand. He marched straight to the spot on the map and said, he told him to stop playing mind games. No more guessing, time to see the truth. He had to see it all for himself. There had to be a real reason. This place once became a settlement, so what if he trips over some secret treasure, only to realize that right now money is totally pointless? He'll never know the truth until it hits him in the face, so he pushed forward. And there it was, towering grass, swaying like it had a secret. He said that with no tall trees around, it was obvious a road had to be here before Turns out, this place was ditched ages ago, so everything's swallowed by wild weeds, and he absolutely refuses to shove through that thorny thicket. What if deadly weeds are creeping in, or mutated ticks are hiding and waiting to strike? Looks like he's about to get forced to admit defeat and swing back. He's fighting it hard, but it's over, he has. Turns out he's magic now, and he can't even wrap his head around it yet. Still reeling that he's actually a sorcerer. He's got zero plans for a forest fire, so he's tossing the fire techniques aside and doing without them. All right, wind magic time. He's about to unleash it, and he'll name it right now. Call it the wind cutter, then he let it loose. Then a gust of wind sliced through the grass in front of him, warning him to scan the whole area for poisons, just in case. The system flashed the message at him: Yopa, that evergreen forest plant. The local stand-in for the tiny, small, all-leaved lily. Its young shoots and bulbs were edible, and he started digging in right away. Then he grinned and said the place was packed with whole deposit. Now his meals are going to get crazy. Wait, aren't those leaves coming from a tuber? Could it be the legendary wild yam? Somehow, the plants here match the old world almost perfectly. So he stumbled into an isekai mountain yam. And for him, this yam is more priceless than any treasure real yam. William has to wait decades for it to grow, and when it's time to dig it up, everything turns into a nightmare. Its roots are so deep and fragile that one wrong move snaps them apart. Those roots are tangled so tight that getting to it takes serious effort. Still, he's got magic. In his arsenal, with a snap of his power over the earth, he snatches it effortlessly. He yanked. Something crawled out of the ground, and it just asked, looking totally lost, "What the hell is going on? What the hell even was that?" No, it didn't look like some monster, but it was seriously weird, like a root vegetable that somehow got turned wrong, maybe even like a radish that went sideways. From that meme, he stashed it in his inventory and swore he'd check the trophy later. Then his detection skill kicked in, and he started scanning the area fast. Something felt off so wrong it made his skin go cold, and a cold sweat erupted on his face. A sour dread crawls inside him. He can't stick around for even one more second. He has to bolt out of here right now. He launches himself forward, yanked himself back, and froze when he spotted two giant footprints stamped into the... He crumpled to the ground, eyes wide with panic, and blurted, "What is that? Is it another?" One more monstrous threat, or the locals launching an attack on him. He whipped around and stared at a praying mantis perched beside him, staring him down as if it knew his next move. He stared at him, and worry snapped into place. Was this about to turn into something absolutely massive? A gigantic praying mantis that could turn invisible. Would he really have to battle something like that? An enemy again. Come on, can't we talk this out like we did with those birds? He stepped in, greeted him, and pushed. So what about... He didn't just shrug off the fact they'd met. He wasn't planning to turn hostile. But it wasn't letting up. Then the monster snapped in with a brutal, earth-shaking paw strike. But the moment he clocked it, he recoiled and sprang back. And he snapped. Things were getting brutal. He couldn't strike a deal with him at all. And then the monster started to take over. Then he faded back into invisibility and warned that one strike from him would end everything for his opponent. To slip out of the monster's strike one more time, and he said, yeah, turns out that detection skill was wrecking it for him big time because the system basically chimed in, detection is a passive ability. It had the power to lock onto every single move inside its range. And when he realized that, he started thinking. He just now clocked what it really was now. The real question, could he actually use it right? He leaned in, stared hard, and there it was, a mantis-shaped silhouette. Unlike my own invisibility, he said, this only hides the body. It doesn't erase the presence. Then he started. He snapped into water magic, wore that grim face, and declared, it's my turn now, but water magic isn't. It's not just about controlling liquids. Its real power is pulling water straight out of the moisture hanging in the air. He spotted it in the goddess's letter, then lashed the monster down with water and shouted. And it warned, this will hurt, then dared him to go ahead because it wanted the kill so bad, it basically demanded it. Simply ending it would be a total waste of resources. So if that's the case, then its carcass better be stripped for part. Those sides could forge weapons or tools, so he had to take it down cleanly without landing a single hit. He braced for the damage, then spotted a bunch of worms crawling out of the praying mantis's body. He blurted it out, yelling, Is that a hairworm, an alien parasite? The system snapped back. It's a parasitic worm that rides inside praying mantises as its host. And when breeding season hits, it drags its host straight to the water, traps them there, and forces them to drown so it can crawl back to its real home. Yuri stared at it in pure horror and snapped, "It can't parasitize a person." He recoiled in disgust, sliced it into pieces, and turned the mantis into useless scraps for a trophy. Then he charged through the forest, scanning every inch, convinced it had to be close by because of... Staring at the same gray stretch of land, he started to lose track of where he was, and then he spotted a cave. He stepped into the cave and swore, "This is the exact spot on the map." Then peered inside, and the darkness swallowed everything. And he swore he'd forge a towering shaft using earth magic. Rapid and Borskin snap into action, a busted torch is ready, and he darts inside, ready for whatever's next. And he said it was obvious humans carved this cave, yet he couldn't spot a single sign of it anywhere. Nowhere at all. Nothing, not a speck. What could be up ahead? He had to push forward. Saw it him. As far as his legs could take him. He realized way too late that walking on that surface felt downright awful. So uncomfortable it made his steps feel heavy. I can't help but wonder, could he actually make his own new shoes, or would he have to grab them in the city? But there's one problem: he's got zero money, so it's looking like he'll have to. Hardering will save him. He's clinging to the idea that selling the materials he mined will at least get him something, and he's praying he'll trip over real treasures here. Then he spots a huge, blinding crystal, freezes at what he sees, and blurts out that it's a giant stalactite. Lactite blazed under golden rays, and damn what a treasure that felt like. After a while, he headed back home. Home chowed down on meat with a grin so bright it could light up the room. Then insisted it wasn't a stone at all, just a massive, ridiculous lump of... Then he finally hit it with salt bam, a perfectly seasoned steak. One bite, and it's ridiculously tasty. His quiet life in another world is finally starting to turn around. He couldn't forget those monsters he'd faced, and it made him wonder, was this truly the same calm life he'd been craving? It feels like he's taken a wrong turn, yeah. The moment you can tell, everything's about to go sideways, okay? It's time. All right, time for the classic everyday vibe he's about to start farming. Before you even plant a single seed, you've got to hammer out the right soil, because everything good grows from that foundation. Preparation hits hard. 18 preparation, 20 work, because every business rises or falls right here. If the old owners ever grew anything, this land should have been perfect, but it's been abandoned, so it's as hard as stone. To breathe life back into the field, he has to rip out the weeds first, and earth magic makes that part ridiculously easy. After removing. Once the weeds are gone, he's got to tear into the soil and plow the land, because when you aerate it and break it up, the results will blow past every expectation. Earth magic powered him through, so the job got done fast. He even prepped a backup plan just in case. But it won't even matter. He'll dig up at least one bed on his own. He buckled the bed together by hand, finished the whole thing, and set it aside like he was done prepping for war. He said it already looked like the real deal, like an actual vegetable garden. Now he has to get fertilizer, usually horse or cow manure, plus a hit of bird droppings. Right now, this is basically unachievable. There's no way he can pull it off. He's left staring at the problem, completely lost on what to do next. Then, just like that, the birds he'd met earlier swooped back in, chirping like they knew his name. He joked to himself about how wild it would be to ask them to poop right here, and he admitted it was a crazy thought, so they challenged whether he was even thinking straight, and he shot back that he wasn't sick at all. He was totally fine. All right, side note, they never once introduced themselves to each other. He introduced himself and demanded their names, then they stared back and asked what names even were. He froze, baffled, and snapped that a name is what each living thing answers to, but they didn't get it at all. In his head, it hit him, personal names must be totally alien to birds. He told them to call him by name. And he figured that having conversation partners was a real win until that doubt hit hard. What if they turned out annoying? After a while, he cut himself off and threw out a lot. Tosses clumps of grass into the hole. Then the birds stare back like they've seen something they can't explain. He stared at it and blurred, "What are you doing?" Trying to check if he was prepping the soil. Then he immediately shut that down, flat out denying it. He snapped it back and then said, if you leave the weeds to rot, they'll turn into killer fertilizer all on their own, and it'll work even faster with rice bran. But yeah, it'll work because he needs fertilizing right now, and this buys us the time we need. He tore through the stove and hauled out every last scrap of buildup it had been collecting. That leftover ash from burned plants isn't just trash. It's packed with every nutrient the field needs to thrive. It's crumbly and it breaks apart instantly, just like the flower tail on a dead tree. The one the old man who made gardens bloom swore came straight from that experience. And now the prep stage is nearly finished. So what happens next? What should? But should he plant wheat seeds, potato tubers, wild bulbs, or this weird specimen too? He doesn't. He's not touching it. So he figures the next best move is to plant it instead. I'm still blown away by how the seasons shift right here. And Goddess told me it's no accident she handpicked this world. It's a world with the closest climate match to ours right now. It feels like early summer, but who knows if the seasons even work the same way here. He'll have to play it by ear, step by step, and first things first, he'll sow the field with wheat. He tossed the seeds down and the birds swooped in, snatching them up fast, then chattered that he'd brought them more food like that was the sweetest thing ever, and he just froze, confused, insisting, wait, those can't be eaten, because they weren't treats at all. They were meant for the ground, so he could harvest later. And sometimes the bird swoops in to help. Sometimes it all goes wrong, even as their plan starts to slip. And then bam, those mischievous antics kicked everything into high gear. He methodically sowed the crops, then cranked up tree magic to help them sprout, flooded them with water magic on schedule, and on cloudy days, he blasted light magic to keep everything growing. To crank up photosynthesis, he pushed the process to its peak. Then, when the sun turned merciless, dark magic sprang up and carved out shade. This was the first time he ever truly farmed, and with the goddess powers he begged for, everything finally changed. 2 months after he pulled it off, his lands looked nothing like before he had set everything up right, rebuilt his defenses, and now MC was sprawled on his bed, smiling like he'd finally earned real peace, no longer worried about monster raids or the fields getting torn to ruin. That crushing loneliness finally vanished, and he could sink into sleep with a light heart because his loyal little birds, Sakura and Emochi, kept dropping by to check on him, sometimes even dragging their friends in and turning his place into a chaotic squawk fest. Still, they warned him, before the cold hits, we'll be gone, and they had to push through a long, brutal trip to warmer climes ahead. He'd always thought he wanted total solitude, so why did it make his chest ache now? Then the birds swooped in, staring at him with worried eyes, calling for help. He shot upright, shouted what was wrong, and the answer hit hard. Another monster attack. They claimed a tiny man had collapsed and passed out there and told him to rush over right now. Quickly, he froze when he heard it, then demanded, how does a kid end up in a place that remote? He bolted after them, convinced that no matter what the reason was, he had to move fast because one wrong moment and everything could be ruined for good. Then the birds guided him straight into the forest, and he barked loud and sharp, demanding to know where that kid in the thick forest had come from and why he'd gotten split off from the traveling caravan. Or was he just left to rot in his fate? The birds darted him toward a tree. He whipped his head around, but there was nobody. Nothing. Then he shouted at the top of his lungs that he'd come. He heard the call and came running to help. Now he had to answer. No one replied to him, and then he grabbed my attention and told me to, maybe he slipped off somewhere, so they denied it flat out and said, he told him to stare harder. And when he scanned the area with fresh focus, he spotted a fairy crumpled onto the ground and blurted that. So that's who they were talking about, the little person. She's basically a tiny doll glowing with this soft light, and she's ridiculously beautiful. Don't just stand there and stare. He has to rush in and save her. Good news, no wounds, no sickness, nothing to worry about. But still, her magic power was nearly drained to zero. So the restoration potion the goddess gave him has to work, right? Poured straight into her mouth, so tiny it was that he couldn't land his aim at all. He sneezed, then the potion flew from his hands and spilled everywhere. Motion, and blurted it out loud, eyes wide with worry, like he couldn't even hold it in. That he had completely soaked the fairy head to toe in the potion. She jolted awake and started coughing, and he snapped, practically relieved, that he was so happy she'd come back. Her senses flared and rage surged as she snapped, loud and furious, "What are you doing?" Later, when he finally explained everything, she told him he'd gotten unbelievably lucky. He didn't just get his shot at saving her, he even got to talk to her, too. And honestly, he should be proud, because spirits almost never bother to communicate with people. Yuri snapped in shock and said, "Wait, aren't spirits supposed to be like fairies?" Then she grinned and insisted, "Nope, I'm a beer spirit." Here, fairies are made of flesh and blood, and the spirits, they're pure ethereal mist. Then he leaned in and asked. She figured they were basically ghosts, and that felt downright rude, so he pushed and demanded her name, and she shot back that she didn't need one. He said it was just like birds. And the second she heard that rage hit, she snapped and shouted, "What are you hinting at?" He just stared like, "Wait, are you comparing you to bird?" And then he asked, "But isn't this kind of inconvenient, right?" She answered, "I already told you I'm not the type to chat with strangers, so it's fine." Then she leaned in and said, "Spirits know each other by aura, so honestly, they don't even need name." She lets him call her anything he wants. If she likes the name, she'll answer, so when he heard it, he froze, confused, and blurted, "What?" She was hinting at something big. Then she pressed him to swear he wouldn't really abandon something so fragile and drain the last bit of her spirit until nothing was left. Maybe she'd finally be safe under his care for a while. So he better treat her right, because the spirit swoops in anyway, even though nobody asked her to. When the allies rolled up to the settlement, Marshak blurted, "So this is my village." And the protagonist groaned, already knowing she'd somehow dragged herself along. Spirit clocked it immediately. This place was totally trashed, like an abandoned settlement left to rot. The protagonist shot back, "That's right." And you could see she was stunned, because now she had to wonder, what was he even talking about? And he and his family moved into these ruins. MC shot back, "Nah, he's alone." But those birds keep circling for a reason. They come back to him all the time, so he's never really lonely. Marshall couldn't help feeling sorry for the poor kid trapped all alone in a dead village, swallowed by the forest. She had no idea what happened to him, but his pain was obvious. Yuri stared at her, stunned, because why did everyone look at him with that much compassion? Suddenly, it clicked for her, and she blurted, all baffled, "If the only one living in this village is a kid, there's no booze, right?" The protagonist blinked, shocked. "Booze, yeah, of course not." The spirit was practically trembling, and she pressed, hopeful, "Tell me you're joking, please." But the only thing the protagonist could think about was at least one keg of beer. He shot back, "No, I've checked every nook and cranny," and admitted he still couldn't find it. He couldn't find a drop of alcohol or even a trace of how it was made. Marcia snapped, "I'm the spirit of alcohol, no booze, I can't power up." Then the MC threw his hands up in pure confusion. "So what am I supposed to do, let you starve?" Suddenly it hit him. Wait, what if a potion is the answer? And the moment he said it, he remembered how it worked on her. The spirit let out a heavy sigh, then nodded along with him. "True," it agreed, like the world just clicked into place. "You can pull life force from more than booze. Turns out the real power comes from human-made drinks brewed with healing magic." He chased the spirit of alcohol, sure, but those elixirs still tasted awful, and he couldn't help thinking, yeah, that's medicine all right, and it looked downright pathetic. He stared at her, and you could feel the upset rolling off her in waves. Then he snapped back that if she'd chosen to live here, she'd have to bend and compromise, because he was handing over his last potions to her, just out of pure kindness. Marshall let out a heavy sigh and said, "All right, I get it." Yuri braced for him to tell her she was leaving, but he totally had the wrong idea. She wasn't planning to go anywhere, so he'd have to keep a close watch on her for now. Then he'd still have to figure out how to solve the whole food problem, and he stared ahead, stuck on what to do next. He stared at the storage room's list: mana potion 2, health potion 3, and a sack of wheat when then realized the elixirs the goddess had handed him were painfully few. So if he wanted them, he'd have to roll up his sleeves and make them himself. Then, after a bit, Marcia kicked back, settled in deep on a tree branch and dozed all. The protagonist shot back, ready and fired up. He lined up every ingredient and declared he was about to start brewing potions. He didn't have what it took to make alcohol, and even if he did, there was no way he'd be able to drink it. So he shaped bottles with earth magic, and as insurance, just in case potions were the smartest move. A beginner wouldn't smash together bruises like that on a whim. Real potion crafting takes serious skills, like potion making and alchemy. With all that specialized knowledge, he should have also begged the goddess for it, but he hadn't. He grabbed a village life guide, hunted for a way to make it, and after a short while, he finally found exactly what he needed. Bonus skill or not, it was insanely useful. From that moment on, he started calling the person Master. Then he tore through the pages and blurted, "Whoa, so many ingredients." The guide even listed every potion he could brew: health, mana, status, defense, and agility. But it also warned that some potions couldn't be brewed antidotes, strength boosters, supreme health, supreme mana, and regeneration potions, leaving the MC staring in shock like, wait, in addition to, into healing plus stat-boosting elixirs and other mind-blowing potions with special effects. They came in everything from simple brews to absolute masterpieces, crafted. He fused rare ingredients with his special skills, and good news, he could craft a bunch of different varieties from what was on hand. Yuri dove in. Turns out the whole process wasn't nearly as hard as he'd been dreading. At last, he stared at those neat, packed rows of vials and scratched his head, because yeah, he might have gone a little overboard. Still, that spirit wasn't going to stay powerless, and the whole setup paid off fast with a pile of potions he crafted. He unlocked the potion brewing skill. "So I'm actually starting to grow," the protagonist muttered, wondering if he'd learn even more than the goddess handed him. Right then, Marcia gasped, "Wait, what are these potions? Didn't he just tell her there were hardly any?" The protagonist snapped back, "I only made them." The spirit stared in shock. "You did that yourself." She'd never even heard of a kid brewing potions. Then he pressed a vial into her hand. He handed her the vials and urged her to taste it, then pointed out he'd even carved a tiny cup just for her. She tried the potion and immediately grimaced, and the hero blinked in confusion, saying it was brewed the usual way, so it should have been fine though. Marcia only added, with a heavy, sad face, "But it's way better than the elixir she's had up to now." Yuri's face lit up as she blurted, "Wait, are you really telling the truth?" And then after a moment, she decided to take a stroll, and the protagonist clocked it instantly. She was moving like a cat. He snatched one vial, muttered to himself that if it was safe, then he'd use it because her temper was already a ticking bomb. She'd never praise it without reason. And right then, he couldn't stop wondering how this potion was different, like Marcia was soaring in the air. Up in the sky, she stared at him and admitted that the second they met, she'd already sensed it. This kid didn't fit in with anyone she'd met before. No alcohol, no easy escape. But if she stayed here for a while, maybe it wouldn't be all bad. 2 weeks had already torn by, and summer had fully slammed into place, with them working in the heat right where the story left off. Heat could turn deadly fast, and that rule held in the other world too. Except somehow it didn't touch Yuri. Dark magic threw him shade. Water magic smashed his thirst, and wind magic kept him chilled. Then Marcia looked at him, completely baffled, as she asked, what about his mana reserve? She'd never heard of anyone burning that much magic just to farm. The protagonist was surprised, really. But why wouldn't he use what's right there? He still has enough magical power to muscle through the unexpected. It blurted out that she was confused, but she didn't even care, so the protagonist shrugged it off, went straight to taking a nap. Never paused, he shot back, "Okay," under his breath, and flicked more grass into the hole because their bond felt more like neighbors than roommate. So after she showed up, his life barely shifted, especially for a guy who hates anyone meddling where they don't belong. That's the perfect vibe. He glanced up at the sky and grinned at how bright and high it felt, like real summer. Then he tugged at his shirt and said, "I need some summer clothes too." The purification skill keeps the stink away, sure, but one outfit isn't enough. And even if it's still early, winter gear can't wait. Yuri swung into action, deciding to hunt down materials that could actually help. Crushing through the forest path, he blurted, These spots burst with all kinds of plants, even in those thorny patches. Where it looks like nothing but weeds, there's more than meets the eye, and if you search closely, you'll uncover a bunch of truly useful treasures." Then at last, he stumbled on a mal plant growing wild in the field in thick, stubborn bushes, and those woody stems could be turned into tough, long-lasting fiber. The moment he saw it, he blurted, "What a find," because there was plenty to use for one or even two things. After a while, he finally stumbled on cotton. Then the protagonist lit up, said it was gold for building and crafting, and pushed him to grab some and try growing it. Because if the harvest came in big, all that searching would be worth it. Right then, a sound snapped his attention, so he peeked from behind the bushes and nearly lost it when he spotted a towering pillar of gnats. Was that even here? And yeah, those gnats that build this pillar don't drink blood either. Walking through it feels awful. He should steer clear then, right in that instant, a mosquito buzzed up beside him. This shocked the MC too up until now. He'd only been getting sidetracked by magical beasts. So why was it happening right now? He totally forgot the one thing he should fear most, the mosquito, the deadliest little killer on earth. It sneaks up without a sound and its bite can spread all kinds of infections. It's the most common insect and somehow the most terrifying. And yeah, it's not just this ticks, fleas, lice. So many little monsters can carry diseases. And because they're so hard to spot, they've always got you right before you even notice. They should be feared more than magical beasts because this is a whole different world. And if you're wondering whether disease could exist here, it wouldn't be shocking at all. Here, deadly diseases and viruses crawl around that earth never even dreamed of. He finally exhaled once the potions kicked in, but they weren't some cure, all magic. The second this realization landed, dread and terror slammed into him so hard he couldn't breathe. He started swatting that mosquito like it owed him money, yelling at it to stay the hell away, then sprinted home at full speed, sobbing out, "We've got zero time to waste, clothes can wait. I'm going to hunt down some insect repellent, and the natural ones are mint, dokodami, and pyrethrum. Since the wild plants here look so much like home, there has to be something similar growing nearby." Finally, after battling through pure chaos, he managed to track down a parrot, a yearly plant that only grows under blazing sun. This pyrethrum isn't from Earth, it's from another world, and its flowers pack insect poison inside in Japan. They even used it in mosquito coils. People swear these were made from that plant, and when the protagonist cracked open the Village Life manual, the Village Life teacher's expertise was probably the reason he knew exactly how. He blurted in awe, "So you better hold on to those collected flowers for 6 whole months, because winter's going to slam in before then. Surely there's got to be another shot at this." He hurls himself through the manual, grinning like he just found salvation. He blurted, "Yeah, there is." Then the protagonist struck the grass into flame and declared, with pure satisfaction, he uncorked an ancient insect repellent, lit a plume of smoke, and fed the Kairibi fire one wild type of flame that, in Japan, they've been using smoke laced with insect-killing compounds to chase those pesky bugs away. Since ancient times, pyrite's story has been tied to pyrethrum. That'll hit just the same, so at least the inside of the house stays sealed up and pests can't get in. Right then, a furious Marcia shot up to him, snapping with an irritated shout. What the heck is he trying to kill? To kill her. He called her a pest, didn't he now? He's about to pay. Stunned, the MC started scrambling to apologize to her, but he didn't. He didn't see her there coming, and the spirit hissed from behind a barrier almost like it was fencing her in. "Is he really trying to drive you out like this?" Yuri asked her. He apologized, right? And she shot back that it's already summer, and nobody's taken a single step to stop the insects. She couldn't decide if he was a genius or a complete idiot either way. The spirits didn't care, but for humans, insect repellent was non-negotiable. Some of them swarm in and drain you dry of magic, and the protagonist grinning pestered her to spill something else he didn't know, as long as she felt like it. Marshall stared at him at first, totally thrown off. Then he grinned and shot back. "What else am I supposed to do? Let him have her make the drink, she'll tell." The protagonist blurted, "No way, that can't be." And the spirit froze in shock because the MC suddenly, then wait, somehow the gap between them shrank. And after a bit, Yuri sighed and said how badly she craved wine, then asked if no good soul would ever help her out. But Yuri shut it down hard, saying he wasn't going to swap his food supply for alcohol. Alcohol, the spirit snorted and blasted him for being so greedy, convinced she was the spirit of alcohol. Yet she had no name, and 2 months had already blurred past since she moved in with him. Then she told him, "Call me whatever you want. If you say it right, I'll answer after." After those words hit him, he weighed every option. Ray, Tinkerbell, anything, but none of them landed with her. And before he even realized it, they were wrapped up together, intimate, like a couple whose sparks had died long ago, so their living arrangement. In this tense, breath-held atmosphere, the countdown kept going until one hot summer day, everything finally snapped, and our protagonist noticed something had changed. The climate here was way tougher than Japan, so everything sprouted and grew at a crawl. And yeah, it really went down exactly like that. Everything was ready. Time to harvest. With this haul, he could bake bread and told him to make udon while they still had time to harvest. Then Marshall lunged in and stopped him. She dared him to a bet, whoever cut the wheat fastest wins. And if she comes out on top, he has to brew the ale. The girl finally snapped furious, speaking up again because he'd been nothing but selfish. The question hung there. If he won, then what? The spirit swore she'd be obedient, and she'd obey him in everything. The MC just slurred out, totally baffled. What? It felt like he didn't need her for a thing, and the thought hit him hard, and he slammed his decision down. If I win, you'll never mention drinking again. The spirit bristled with outrage. You're a monster, it hissed. Well, she refuses to lose, period. With a serious nod, she told him she was accepting his choice. Then Yuri muttered under her breath, puzzled because she basically cornered him into this, and now he had to drag out earth magic all over again, and trust me, that great bad was just getting started. A brutal sickle showdown erupted between him and the spirit while he hacked through the wheat. He hissed, why did you even get involved in this? With a frame that small, she didn't. He never had a chance. Marshals barreled in and yelled that the moment to start was now, and went to work with such lightning speed that the protagonist's eyes nearly burst out of his head. The spirit warned she couldn't last a day without food, so she grabbed alcohol as her power and swore she'd go all in. That was the road of a true beer spirit, MC muttered in bewilderment that, thanks to, he totally misread her, thinking she'd ever snap out of her eternal laziness. She didn't. At this rate, he'd wind up wasting his precious grain on booze, and that was something he couldn't let happen in no way. Loud then, he slammed the wind cutter on, thinking, yeah, it's not exactly the cleanest play, but hunger gnawed at him, and right then Marcia broke it down for him. Yuri Long gasped, and just like that, another rail fell into place. Victory was right there, begging to be taken. Then he slammed his skill back into action, and before anyone could blink, it was already unleashed. Right then, every last stalk of wheat got sliced clean. Down magic screamed past Marcia's face, missed her by a hair, and she shot into the air just in time, staring in stunned awe at what he'd done, and then the protagonist. Once it was over, he exhaled and blinked in disbelief. This first harvest had vanished so fast he barely had time to feel it, because survival mattered more than stopping to breathe. He told her he'd won because they'd both promised no more booze talk. A spirit tore into him, spitting liar like it was poison. She'd never thought he'd sink this low, and honestly, that cruelty felt vile. But tell me, did he really get off on tormenting a little spirit? MC answered her, and before he even caught his breath, she demanded a bet, then turned around and started blaming him. He'd told her again and again they had zero surplus food, but she swore she was fine living on potions alone. Alone in her own world, she treated drinking like a reckless whim, yet living under his roof, she still could have kept it a lot more modest. Marcia's voice cracked as she blurted, enough, please, forgive me for being selfish. Just forget it all. Then she spun around, waved goodbye, and shot into the sky. Yuri stared, totally confused, and grinned as he said, and what a wild, reckless girl by the end. He was the one left holding the blame. So he decided to live alone. All right, she'll end up getting hungry, then she'll come back on her own after a bit. The protagonist fidgeted and blurted that the sky was fading, and there was still no trace of her. So did she really just leave? What if monsters came crashing into the forest and went after her? He snapped his arms tight over him the second it crossed his mind. He dragged his breath over his chest and muttered, even if it happens, so what? What does it change for me? He stood there a moment, snatched up his weapon, spat a curse, and sprinted into the forest to find her. Meanwhile, up in the tree, Marcia sat there and stared into the sky, then finally blurted, okay, what do I do next? Now that she was gone, going back to that boy wouldn't be simple, but somehow it looks like there were no other towns around, and she had zero urge to crawl back to the city she once called home because she still had to find him. She chased the last bit of safety before total darkness swallowed everything. Then she tore off at once, searching like her life depended on it suddenly. Suddenly, the spirit zeroed in on the rat's bell being ripe. Those tiny berries show up from early summer, all the way to autumn, packed with sweet, refreshing juice that confectioners fight over. She remembered the protagonist saying he wanted to try growing fruit. Then he promised every last fruit would be good enough to eat, but not one of it would help with anything sweet. I'm pretty sure that's how he put it, because sugar, the whole backbone of alcohol making, is basically impossible to swap out in winemaking. If she dared tell him, he'd snap out of it fast because there were way too many bearers like this. Berries here. So why on earth would she bend over backward for him when she had zero plans to come back? And then, if he came tearing in himself to beg her to come back, she might have agreed, sure, but no. This totally felt like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. And right then, she heard a rustling sound and her heart leapt. Could it be? Was he finally coming for her? She revved up her breath and barked that she didn't say it meant she was happy to see him at all. Not even a little. A massive boar burst out from behind the bushes and stared at her like it wanted a feast. She shrieked in pure terror and shot off to the safest place she could find. A safe distance, he muttered under his breath. I almost got busted right then like a snake had my name in its mouth. A snake hissed beside her and snapped its mouth open like a threat. Marcia screamed, pure terror exploding out of her. Again, the spirit shot upward and spotted massive birds beside her, then blurted, even up in the sky there's danger. Hiding in the shadows, the spirit hissed, what kind of insane forest is this? Seriously, there are spooky monsters lurk around every corner, and there's no way she could have pushed through that thicket like that. If she only had known what was waiting, she'd never leave him then. Out of nowhere, that awful rustling clawed back into the air. She froze, shuddered, and screamed in pure terror. A monster again. Bursting out from behind the thicket, the protagonist grinned and blurted, there you are. Finally, I found you. Thank goodness she was safe. He shot out his hand, grabbed her confidence, and told her, come on, let's go home. Marshall burst out in tears, choking out the words, and she said, if he insists, then fine, let him have it. I'll come back. Once they finally made it back, she snapped, so why did you even go hunting for me in the first place? He dropped onto the bed and told her, straight up, he couldn't leave her, not while she was partly to blame for what she did. He acted like it. Even though he was older, he acted just like a kid, so let her forgive him. Marcia stared at him, shocked to her core, and he snapped, yeah, he's just a kid, only a seriously weird one. Then he burst into laughter and said, yeah, I guess she's right. The spirit stalled, then mumbled with a sheepish grin, maybe he should forgive her too. She acted moody as usual, but just like she promised, she stopped whining about drinking. Then the protagonist laid out his plan. He was going to expand the garden. He couldn't pin down the exact moment, but once the timing felt right, he figured they could finally try brewing alcohol. Then Marcia stared at him, totally baffled, and asked why he'd switched his mind. MC said it hit him. He remembered everything, how brutal it was to survive on meds alone, without the power to taste a single delicious thing, and the relief hits like a wave when this ordeal finally cracks shut. Spirit Confucius. Confused, she blurted, what are you talking about, Yuri? Then she froze mid-sentence. Embar. Blushing hard, he summed it up by begging for her hell down the road, and when it was all said and done, he named her Marcia. The spirit stared at him and blurted, so that's her name, and the protagonist snapped back. Yeah, what's it supposed to mean? He said he picked it himself after the goddess of wine from back home, and then he grinned, if she doesn't like it, I'll cook up another one, no doubt. Marcia softly murmured her name, flashed a bright smile, and told him, yes, I love it, before thanking him so warmly. Meanwhile, more than 10 kilometers southwest of the protagonist's home, the village of End sits in wait. The adventurers were on the brink, battling a massive grizzly bear monster with everything they had until their leader snapped. If this thing smashes into the village, it's over for them, but the reinforcements are charging in, so they've got to dig in and hold the line until the very end. The grizzly growled like a threat from hell, snapped its fangs in pure menace, and then it bolted straight into the forest. The leader bragged that he'd slipped out. At last, the bastard was getting cocky, yet the so-called genius still got caught. It's basically a miracle nobody got killed in that showdown with the enemy. One of the team members leaned in and asked the commander if they should chase after them, and the leader shut it down fast. No way they could push that far. because that's exactly where those lands start. Begin, it's a cursed packed with monsters and empty of people, where Yuri's nightmare can rampage unchecked with all the time in the world right where no one dares to live. Barry had no clue that the spot he'd moved into was called the Affected Lands until Marcia leaned by the window and told him that amazing rat-bell berries grew there and that they'd sneak over tomorrow to pick them, and MC nodded along. He never saw the coming storm then. The next day, the allies charged off to the spot Marcia had pointed out, and while the protagonist shoved berries in his mouth, he blurts, grinning ear to ear, "Wow, that berry is heavenly," he blurted out, staring at it like it was magic. "So this is the rat spell," he said, and you could tell he'd been craving a sweet like this for ages. Later, the protagonist told Marcia to plant that crop right at home, and when the spirit finally showed up again, it slipped back, dropped a bowl of berries at their feet, and growled, "Don't gulp them all at once." They'd busted their backs for this. Getting those wine ingredients is brutal. He just laughed, popped the berry into his mouth, and told her not to sweat it. He couldn't cram that much in anyway. But can you really make wine using only the fruit? Marcia shot back. Exactly, usually. Normally, they dump sugar into the berries to kickstart fermentation. But these local berries are insanely sweet, so the whole batch should work out perfectly. As they started prepping, the spirit leaned in and said the technique wasn't even that hard first. Crush the washed berries. Toss them into a clean vessel, park it in the shade for a couple of months with fresh air flowing, and don't miss a day. Stir them every single day so everything processes evenly. Yuri blurted in shock, and then it hit him. "So what about the yeast?" The spirit shrugged, saying it's probably chilling on the food's surface, and after that it's pure luck. If the right fungi take hold, you'll get wine. But if harmful bacteria storm in and take over, everything will just rot from the inside out. He tested the berries, saw they were safe to eat, but the weird microflora clinging to their skin didn't match anything he knew. So he froze, thinking. That skill couldn't pin down which microorganisms were which, and if he triggered purification, the helpful yeast would get wiped out too, so magic was useless here. He'd have to gamble on luck, and then, handcrafting it yourself has real magic. While he stirred the fruit, he realized miso and soy soup follow a similar recipe too, and with milk on hand, they'd be able to whip up cheese and yogurt as well. Once they cracked the tech and learned to steer it, the sky would be the limit, no question. He treated the problem like it mattered, studied it close, finished his part, and then asked the spirit if she thought it all came out right. Marcia stared at the result and said it looked seriously respectable. With her face cradled in her hands, she sighed, "I can't wait to try it. Do you think it'll ripen before autumn?" She's desperate to shove time faster. "Honestly, I can't stand it, and the protagonist thinks she's acting like some schoolgirl trying to power through her biology assignment." He blurted out, "How did you even get to the point where you were so close to doing it?" Vanished into the thicket. Honestly, it made way more sense than anything else. So she really had to live like a princess in a wine cellar. Was that the only way she could have made it? The spirit got shoved away. Or something just as bad, and she immediately knitted her brows, dropped her gaze, and caught herself before it went any further. He swallowed his pride and begged, "Please forgive me," because he never meant to hurt her, not a single bit. But Marcia yanked his face toward her and demanded, "Will you?" He actually listened to her whole story, and yeah, it was all just brutal. Thank him for asking. He couldn't help but shudder at how fast and deadly she moved. And then no. Noticed she'd rattled him to the core. Then the spirit kicked off her tail, telling him that for years her home had been nothing but a brewery tucked in a huge city. The owner, an old man, was gentle to the bone, and somehow he could understand every word they spoke. In the wild places where creatures like her ruled, their guarded, enchanted drink didn't just protect it. Hit so deliciously it felt unreal. Out of gratitude, people would always come bearing offerings ever since the dawn of time. That's how they survived. They kept helping each other until the old man died and every business deal slid into his son's hands. And that's when the whole thing crashed. He only cared about profit, cutting corners on supplies and workers, until the beer quality tanked. If their name was on the bottle, people would still buy it no matter what. Nobody could tell what was real and what was tainted. Then the old man's son snapped and called her a pest, claiming she'd stolen wine and decided she had to go. He hunted down a spirit exorcist and ordered him to kill her. She bolted after it at once, only to find every nearby distillery already taken by other spirits. So she had no choice but to blast off in search of a brand new home. She got swallowed by the forest, got totally lost and crumpled to the ground. Then the MC blinked like, so that's it. Of course, a big shot businessman like him wouldn't even hear her out, but the spirit had noticed, wait, what? But honestly, he just never heard her voice. And the crazy part is, to most people, it's like they're nothing more than dim, flickering lights. To the naked eye, a spirit is nothing but a ghostly flicker. She used to swear she didn't care for talking to people, but honestly, there are hardly any left who can even hear them. So yeah, people like him are pure gold, Yuri blurted, shocked. How do you see me that clearly? Marcia opened her mouth to say, it all comes down to how strong his magic is, or how perfectly they match. And she swore his potions slid down easier than anything she'd ever had. Because of that, he stands above the rest. His creator's magical aura sinks deep into every one of his creations. She left him stunned. With her words, he felt a little awkward about it. Sure, but man, it was still nice to hear. Then he just said they could only pray the wine turns out amazing, and she nodded right along with him. 1 month later, the allies finally admitted it. The wine was a total bust, and Marcia crumpled, sobbing in pure confusion, yelling, but why? The protagonist was just as shaken and furious. Everything was smooth on paper, at least, but the spirit moaned, this is it, the end. And dread hit like a hammer. Life was empty, and every dream had vanished. Hope drained out. Then the MC stepped in, choosing to back her no matter what, and with a shaky smile, he urged her to steady herself. Don't give up. We can always try again. Autumn's creeping in fast, and that means berries everywhere. Spirit finally stopped crying, but the sadness still clung to her like a weight. After a bit, Yuri finally said, yeah, if he can't fix this, Marcia's going to tumble straight into full-blown depression. Right then, a sound snapped through the air, and he muttered, hold up, there's someone behind me. Then came that wall-still sound, and it absolutely didn't match the ugly scrape of stone someone had fallen into. He'd turned that pit into a death trap, then ripped the intruder apart like a butcher. When the protagonist raced toward the sound, he stopped cold, stunned beyond belief. Right in front of him, a massive grizzly was tearing into a wild carcass, chewing like it owned the whole forest. A savage boar got slammed into a pit trap, and one of the monster's eyes stayed shut like it was ready to pound. A jagged scar ripped across his whole eyelid, and the protagonist's thoughts crashed in right after it. Racing through my head, autumn hits like a blessing, when forests and rolling hills open their hearts and overflow with generosity. They share their gifts, and right when the cold starts creeping in, both people and animals hustle hard to get ready. Freezing air hung in the air, and even the magical beasts weren't spared the grizzly. Then it hit full height. As soon as I noticed him, my stomach dropped, and alarm bells blared in my head. A bear, no, a monstrously huge one loomed in front of him. And was he really about to pull a boar out of a pitfall trap? What kind of power, huh? Yuri clenched his fists and tried to steady his breathing, because if his memory was right, you don't panic the moment you meet a bear, so you step back slow, keep locked eyes, widen the gap inch by inch, and don't turn away, or you'll be done. Anyone who hesitates to step back or tries to bolt will get spotted as prey by the beast, and when that happens, it'll start tearing into him right away. Pushing to full speed, if it moves, he can bait it. Now's the moment to strike before it catches on. A trap snaps shut, then the protagonist rockets through his plan, sprints like a blur, and slams himself behind a giant pillar. He planted himself dead center in front of the trap, right where he could smash the enemy's charge. Then the grizzly came roaring in. Leaping after him, the protagonist knew with his sheer bulk he could just clear that wall in one move. If he let go right now, peace would vanish for good. So he swallowed hard and apologized in his head to his opponent because he still had to finish him. Right when the bear charged toward the trap, it suddenly exploded to the side and the MC froze. Stunned beyond belief. Eyes sharp, he dodged like every predator would, surviving a brutal combo attack that hit with raw strength and even more. Astonishing cunning. His opponent roared like a nightmare and the protagonist shouted too, so how on earth could he manage that? As the opponent leapt in, he snapped his magic on, then the bear soared over the pit and roared with a savage fury. The protagonist suddenly thought as he leapt that the prey was unbelievably impressive. Pressure kept cranking up, and there was no way he could slip out of it now. Hanging in the air, MC held his breath and waited for the perfect moment, then unleashed a stone wall stood right in front of him. When the grizzly slammed into it, the impact was brutal and simple. Yuri dropped straight into the pit, no hesitation at all, and then decided to doused everything in water until not a single thing was left untouched. Then, once it was over, though, he folded his hands in prayer and begged the beast for forgiveness. And he added, like a vow, that he'd squeeze every last bit out of its remains. After a moment, he scanned the fallen monster and froze when he realized it was a grizzly. Grizzly Gambit, he blurted in shock, thinking, if even a weakling like me can beat it, was it really some lower rank? That ranking creature around here. The locals know the danger so well, they'd warn you right away. Let him never have to meet it. Then he ran into one more human, and it shattered nothing because Yuri just sank deeper into his delusion. Picking the next one, he flipped his tablet into clean mode and told himself he'd deal with the bear carcass later. After stashing the spoils, MC grinned, all right, now I need to get something for Marsh. And then, after a while, he joyfully reported, the spirit, he was home. He showed her a mountain of fruits, proudly telling her to just stare at everything he'd managed to grab today, and the spirit melted onto her knees, utterly stunned. The whole state seemed soaked in pure nihilism. Then he blurted, voice shaking, asking what happened to her. Marcia broke down in front of him, openly crying, and the moment it hit her, she realized that everything in this world was only decay and vanity hung in the air. Then panic hit her hard as she realized she was on the brink of a full-on nervous breakdown. He shoved the fruit into her hands and told her he'd found something truly worthwhile, so she better yank herself together. These were overripe, and they came from brewed wild berries so potent they could have swapped right in for wine. And when the spirit went bleh, click, he jerked back in shock, staring at what she'd just pulled off. Marcia snapped that he still didn't get it. She'd ordered a real healing drink made by humans. Noble alcohol was a centuries-old bond between humans and spirits, and it mattered way more than some cheap imitation of nature. She sighed, snatched up the berry, and said, fine, I'll try just a little one, then bit in and gasped, whoa, it's actually really good. Do you have another one like this? The protagonist grumbled. Couldn't stand that she did this kind of thing, and after a while, the spirit admitted those fruits warmed her up perfectly, and he figured, yeah, she'd finally snap back to normal. Then, MC glanced out the window and realized the days were already shrinking fast. The border loomed ahead, and the chill was already creeping in. Winter was about to slam into this world, so they had to kick off serious preparations right now to stay warm and comfortable through it. In his head, he painted the perfect winter hideout, fire blazing, warm clothes ready, food stacked high, fruit aplenty, and Marcia on hand, and Yuri told the spirit exactly that. So yeah, starting today, they're cracking down and gearing up for winter. But first they had to lock in 4 essentials: fuel, food, warm clothes, and blankets. Marshall threw his support behind the plan. Yeah. He leaned in and asked her how anyone stayed warm in the city she used to call home the spirit. The spirit snapped back. Of course it was a fireplace, and our protagonist just stared, totally confused, thinking the same thing she'd already assumed. Then she shot him another question. I asked MC what was wrong, and he said he'd pictured a cozy fireplace at first, but the heat range was way too small. Small as a fist, and their house sat cold with stone floors even under the blankets. That chill wouldn't quit. A chill from the ground would stab through everything, plus burning up twice as much firewood in both the stove and the fireplace turned into a disaster collecting firewood. Just couldn't keep pace with spending that hard. Marcia pressed him, so what do we do? Yuri paused for a beat, then snapped, I've got it. I've got an idea. He's already a magic prodigy. So why not try? The protagonist starts weaving exactly what's in his head, and Marcia kept checking the product, but this sight still spooked her a little. Then after a while, she suddenly blurted, It's finished. He harnessed the stove's leftover heat to power a heated floor, and the spirit stared, shocked, like, wait, what did you? Just tell her when it happens. He chuckled and snapped, touch the floor. That's it. The spirit did, she blurted out, wide-eyed. It's warm. Then the protagonist shot back, explaining he'd installed that extra. He set the stove one level lower so the heat blasted straight up under the flooring. Then, as it slipped beneath, it escaped out through the chimney. After all that heat and smoke, didn't it all just puff out through the roof window first? So he decided that That kind of treasure can't be allowed to rot. Not like this. Plus, he'd kept the old stove going all summer, so she had nothing to fear. Could she even hear him? Marcia flopped onto the floor, shut her eyes with a blissful sigh, and right when she and realized she was wilting under the scorching sun, like she was fading before his eyes. She'd never felt anything like it before it was two. She slipped into sleep almost instantly, like the warmth pulled her under, and MC left her there, cozy, while he headed out to start working. Yuri went out. He strode out into the garden, rolled up his sleeves, snapped, "It's autumn in those beds." And as he picked the harvest, he grumbled through every step. Ghoul would have never guessed the seed tubers from the village would grow this luxuriously. Now he's about to witness a harvest like nothing he's seen before. Ripping the root vegetables from the earth, the protagonist burst out laughing. What a harvest! And immediately wonders if the soil's this fertile for a reason. But the wild plants and crops are thriving so hard it's unreal. So why did everyone walk away from this land in the first place? This place isn't wasted, it's just waiting to be claimed. In one of the beds he stared, confused, because the tops looked totally different. What was up with that? Then he yanked on a stem. The protagonist watched strange root vegetables burst up from the ground, one after another, like the earth was summoning something terrifying. He even yelped in terror because when they turned up, they looked so unreal, like creatures. Then it hit him. He was the one who planted this, and it totally slipped his mind. MC yanked the stem, even. With even more force, Yuri shoved aside a long branch and boom, a whole cluster of identical fruits spilled into view. Yuri gasped, "Wait, seriously, they actually grew." He stared at those creepy, mandrake-looking things, then asked someone to appraise them only to find out they were Halgan's line, and he still couldn't wrap his head around why they looked nothing like. Like mandrakes, yeah, they could power potions, and with enough of them, he could even set up a whole pharmacy. So collecting them was totally worth it after a while. He hurriedly tore into his hard work's results, digging up crates of potatoes, stocking grain and meat, even hauling in fruit so now everything won't spoil. The cold dragged on like a curse by spring. There was nothing left but winter clothes and bedding, and those boar bristles just weren't meant to be worn. But that bear fur is perfect. Yeah, it's a pain. But if he strings that yarn the right way, he'll end up knitting sweaters. The clothes are figured out, the materials are ready, and the bedding. Bear fur alone won't fix this mess because the skin's so heavy it turns sleep into pure torture. And trying to spin that much wool just to make one blanket is flat out impossible. Ideally, he'd stitch covers from plant fibers and stuff them with cotton, but he couldn't track down any. Cotton wasn't an option in this weather, so he had to whip up a straw mattress, and right then Omochi swooped in and shouted at him. The protagonist beamed, greeted his pet, and asked if he came alone. Omochi said Sakura would show up later, and then, whoa, he looked puffier than usual. Had he been overfed? What if he started flying slow, got snatched by some predator, and vanished? He crouched and petted him, and Omochi burst out laughing, squealing that it tickled. But the Emsu blinked. No, he wasn't really plump at all, more like winter shedding. Then his eyes snapped wide with a sudden thought. Winter fluff. Omochi noticed. Yuri glanced at those terrifying eyes, then burst out laughing and told the bird, "Man, I'm just hoping I can get that much fluff." Omochi blurted in shock. "Do you really need feathers?" He already had a huge nest, so why was he building it at all? The protagonist snapped back. "I don't need a nest, I just want the feathers," then admitted, "but I'll need a lot." So does he know where he can grab more of it? Omochi tells him there's some onion a little farther down the road, and the protagonist blurts out in shock, "What? What is it?" And just like that, a scream tore through the air. MC instantly knew it was Sakura's voice because she was getting attacked. He bolted outside and Yuri froze in shock. What the heck are these things? They're massive. Look at that wingspan. They've got to be around 10 meters tall. These monsters were like walking hurricanes, massive birds barreling after Sakura. Omochi shot up and yelled, "Luca, they've attacked!" The protagonist leaned in and asked, "Wait, are these the same ones I hang him?" Once, he couldn't stop thinking, if they come for him, they're going to torch his house and ignite the fuel. Fields are doomed to destruction, and worst of all, his friend is right there in the blast zone too. Friends are going to get hurt if nothing changes, the protagonist snapped, swearing he'd never let anyone he cares about get dragged into danger. Then the MC moved instantly. Yuri's eyes went wide as he snapped his wind cutter into action. Then one of those monsters slammed it back, repelling his strike. Prize had hit him. Those giants weren't floating by luck. They'd wrapped themselves in wind magic to keep their massive bodies up. And that's why the wind current had started to fade. His wind cutter sliced through the air, and then the enemy screamed to his own, "There's one here, Yuri, get ready." The lookouts started chattering fast. "Pray kill them, pray," Yuri snapped in. He stood there, totally baffled. Were they even speaking? The gesture screamed, "Dialogue won't work." So he snapped, lunged, and tore them down without a second thought. 3 opponents deadly fast, and when he locked onto one, the other. They'd swarm and attack the second he hesitated, so he had to shatter their formation first, because he'd been grinding his magic day after day to make sure he could. He prepped for every possible outcome, so he could handle it without wasting another second. Then he fired up the beam. Beam is a magical light attack that hurls concentrated power into one spot, blinding the enemy. Then it strikes again, and the lucky one survives. Loki bolted in every direction, and the protagonist grinned, perfect timing. Then he instantly unleashed confusion magic, that dark spell that leaves the enemy stunned and helpless. He cut through the enemy's control and stole their choices, then fought to buy himself a few precious seconds so he could line up his signature move. He slammed a massive water ball into place and locked the opponents inside him. The colossal birds finally fell silent Right then, Marcia burst onto the scene, staring in stunned disbelief as he'd slaughtered 3 giant birds all at once. MC sheepishly snapped out a yes, then immediately felt awkward as he kept drowning his enemy over and over. He had to figure out how to wipe them out fast without dragging anyone through needless pain. The spirit blurted in surprise, "Wow, what a little kid." After a moment, he leaned in and told her that the materials were set, and the moment was here they could finally start crafting. First came the fiber. They had to pull the skins off the plants, then soak those skins in water for hours. Then he grabbed a special tool, peeled off the outer layer, and after drying everything, it left behind clean, pure white fiber. Yuri tore the material into tiny scraps and started weaving them together, and the threads that came out were rock solid. Her country life, know-how guiding every step as she worked. So the work kept flying, and he spun threads at a pace no normal person could even dream of. Then he wove the finished threads he stuffed it into sacks, every scrap of purest down he'd gathered from the fallen Luca. All of it purified, and at last the down comforter was finished, and the protagonist erupted with joy. Marcia beamed and realized she had a blanket too, and with that country life skill guide, he turned bare fur into yarn and knit sweaters right up to the moment where it all just barely began to add up. Just a few days before winter hit, the Allies scrambled to get ready, but his dream of a cozy winter wasn't finished yet. Done, Marcia kicked, back in her sweater. Cozy on that warm floor like nothing in the world could touch her, because she felt totally safe. Then the spirit's voice rang in her head. Leaving the city was the right call. And with one drink, it would be absolutely perfect. The protagonist grinned, then leaned in like, "Wait, if you look at it that way, doesn't that mean, isn't it way too low to even dare call this your dream?" She stared him down and demanded to know what that look was on his face. Was it really? Seriously? All of it? He jabbed a finger and told her to look right there in the Spirit X. It blurted in shock as a brand new room popped up. Wait, is this even some kind of storage room? The MC jabbed his finger at a huge stone bowl sitting in the center of the room and with a grim voice announced, "It's a bathtub." Marcia marched up to it, stared in disbelief, and blurted, "A bathtub, seriously? What is that?" Yuri's eyes widened. She had zero idea what kind of bath this was. The bathtub was, and that was the whole culture of this other world. He laid it all out for her, and she just grunted, totally lost. And then she snapped, That's weird." He stared at her, totally baffled. And then the spirit laid out her position. But why did it feel like she wasn't supposed to be there? Is she right, Dirk's like that? Once the body's contaminated, a cleansing spell can wipe it out, and he uses that trick all the time. So yeah, what's the catch? Purposely building that kind of structure and locking yourself in scalding hot water was basically just total waste of energy, he complained, but it was painfully dull. Still, back in his homeland, it was a huge part of their culture. She told herself she'd understand it the moment she tried it, but the spirit shot back that she was perfect just the way she was. A heated floor and a thick sweater were already more than enough to keep her warm. And that warm floor, that was basically a fairy tale. She lay back down. He pressed down and breathed out like it felt incredible because in a world where magic was everywhere, that kind of reaction was basically guaranteed. Out loud, he muttered, "So be it," and told himself he could enjoy this in peace. No guilt attached. He stripped off and kicked the water to test the heat, then sank in with a jolt of pleasure, letting out little bursts of happy sounds as the warmth soothed him. Then Marcia heard those noises and immediately started wondering what on earth they were. MC burst into joyful laughter and snapped, "This is the first real bath he's had in forever, pure bliss." Seriously, a big bathtub is everything. Everything. He'd always dreamed of a hot spring-like bath. Sure, the hospital let him wash up, but it wasn't even close to this. And the moment he first arrived, he never pictured he'd get to slip into a real bath. He could step back into the bath again, but only because his magic was on another level. He heated the water by mixing water and fire magic, so he never had to. He scrounged for firewood because the water could be reheated and the body got cleaned with cleansing magic. No detergents needed, sure. There weren't any towels, but he could suck the extra moisture out with water magic, then whip up wind and fire to mimic a hairdryer. And with all this magic, he could actually live. Even without electricity or tools, Yuri stayed nice and comfortable until, as he soaked in the hot water, he realized the days were getting colder, and he didn't even have time to finish that thought. He didn't have to worry about it anymore. His winter gear was finished, and right on cue, snow started to fall. After a bit, he stepped outside and noticed that turns out this world truly did run on 4 real seasons, so he even whipped up a snowman shaped like a rabbit, carved the ears from bird feathers, and then drew in the eyes. With soot streaking his mouth, he pressed on then, maybe because he'd landed in a kid's body. The sight of falling snow lit up his excitement. He muttered, "I'm freezing." And as soon as he stepped into the house, he grumbled that his hands and feet were completely numb, and he was desperate to warm up in the bathroom. So Marcia tiptoed in and told him to wait because he was clearly hiding. Spirit snapped irritably, "Tell him to get the alcohol," while MC tried to figure out what she was hiding from her. "He's sneaking sips in there. Come on, let him admit it. He must have scored something delicious and locked it away from her," Yuri blurted, totally baffled. What alcohol? He was still a kid, after all. Marcia wouldn't let it go. Ever since he got that bathtub of his, he's been vanishing. Every other day, he sank into that hot water and it screamed, "Something's wrong." Plus, there's no way just boiling in there could make the weird sounds he kept blurting out, and now she finally got the full picture. She realized he only made those sounds the exact moment he took a swig from the bottle. And the protagonist was furious to learn those sipping that alcohol. Yeah, that part is what feels weird as hell. Spirit blurts, so he's just going to keep pretending he's clueless. Then pushes it forward like, "Fine, let her use this tub too, and watch her catch him red-handed as he blatantly lies right to her face." And after a while, she looked completely different, almost unrecognizable, sinking into the steaming hot water as she let out the same sounds he did. She blurted, "What the hell is this?" Then immediately snapped, "It's just amazing." And from now on, she's using it too, while the protagonist just muttered, "Yeah, that's exactly what I expected." The very next day, they set up a tiny bathtub just for Marcia, no bigger than a little basin, so every single day Yuri had to haul water for her, but the spirit never knew when to stop. And afterwards, she'd keep getting sick. After that, he told her, yeah, for real, he always made her step out before she overheated. So now he has to keep taking care of it nonstop. He kept trying to get her attention, but when silence wouldn't break, panic tugged at him had she fallen asleep. And then he caught himself spiraling into, wait, was it from the very start? Even though the bathtub was tiny, he still choked with embarrassment trying to open the door while Marcia was bathing. And that's when things started to go off the rails. This became a dull, daily routine set in, and soon he couldn't feel a thing anymore. Days blurred together. Time dragged on without mercy. Seasons rolled by, one after another. And then, on a sunny, warm day, MC threw his arms up and shouted with pure joy, yes, the most comfortable season is here. Summer's finally arrived. Boom, Yuri hit his second year in this strange new world, and you could tell time had just zoomed because the protagonist blurted out that it felt like yesterday, and then he'd had more to say. Locked into his daily routine, he decided this year would be a whole new level because if he wanted real self-sufficiency, he knew he'd have to keep pushing that. After reincarnation, he'd started a daily diary, but now it was turning into a ticking time bomb. He stared at an entire warehouse of stone tablets and blurted, "What am I even supposed to do with all this?" No paper existed, so he carved his words right into the tablets. But if the floor gave way, everything would crumble because the map he'd found wasn't even paper. It was parchment. This village clearly didn't use paper at all, or it was worth an insane fortune. Then the real solution finally showed up a bit later, and the MC decided to start making paper, already having set everything up. He had everything ready to go, but one brutal question wouldn't let him rest. He'd decided to do it, so how on earth was paper even made? Marcia shot back with a sleepy yawn, like she couldn't care less. Then he realized he might have already missed his chance. He managed to get the perfect raw stuff, especially a bunch of fibrous weeds, like several different kinds. Just like rough tree bark, this herb packs insect killing power. Party's Yuri snapped out that a guide to rural life always comes in handy, anything to keep the supplies safe from insects. Difficult times he couldn't stop himself from being overwhelmed, thanking the goddess with all his heart, because without this, who knows what would have happened. So what would have happened to him now since the protagonist had just cracked the code to turn plants into paper? First, they crushed the plant stuff to bits, rinsed it clean with water, then boiled it in a nasty, super concentrated alkaline solution. Then he scraped away every impurity until only the fibers remained, and after that, he had to hammer it with a rubber mallet to finally split the fibers apart. Next, he dissolved those separated fibers in water. Using a special tool, they shaped everything into thin sheets with a paper mold fine metal mesh pressed into the bottom. Then the protagonist carefully muttered under his breath. He weighed alkali, a rubber mallet, and even that metal mesh, then realized he couldn't get a single one of them. Not even substitutes. Was it really going to be magic to build a proper tablet storage facility? He shut that thought down fast because he'd just been preaching quality, and now he was about to give up. Marcia muttered, seething, how loud is it when MC totally ignores her continued pleas? If you lock onto a goal, you'll find a way. Ingenuity is everything. And he just needs to steady his mind and muster his strength, so he boils it in concentrated alkali first, driving the unwanted plant bits apart and pulling the fiber out. Maybe magic could pull off the same kind of miracle, so he checked his status skills and discovered dark magic decomposition. There it is. He checked the fibers strong enough to hold, no problem. Now the catch, he had to make sure only the junk rotted away. Once he finished that delicate setup, Yuri pulled the fiber free. And now it was time for the final stage. He had to crush it down for good. No rubber mallet, so he built an Earth One, thinking that might do the trick too, started splitting the fiber, and Marcia snapped, complaining that the noise was hammering everything into chaos, leaving the protagonist unable to sleep. So he carved a homemade stone mold and soaked the crushed fiber to kickstart it. He mixed the fiber and water, shoved it all into the mold, then let it dry, because the real key was spreading those fibers evenly. He watched the containers settle into the water, perfectly fine and evenly spread. Then he couldn't help wondering, could he pull off the same thing with water magic too? He snapped to the truth he couldn't do it. The fibers sat crooked and uneven. No matter how he wrestled the water, it still wouldn't let him pull off work that fine. Frustration ripped through him. Those fibers had crumbled to nothing, and even wood magic couldn't budge a thing. And he never imagined making paper would throw so many brutal obstacles in his way. But he'd come this far, so he had to claw his way out somehow. Later, Marcia showed up and told him she was home. But when she saw his excitement, she grumbled that he was still at it. Then MC burst out, all smiles. It worked. Marcia jolted with surprise, then Yuri barreled right on, finally nailing the trick of shifting the fibers for a smooth, even weight. He was just getting to the point. All that remained was to let it dry, and the paper would finally be ready, and he'd make more before this feeling slipped away. Spirit watched, and it was terrifying how stubbornly he kept going. Yuri didn't realize it yet, but in that exact moment, he accidentally unlocked attributeless magic. The only way to bend matter was zero attribute, a feat nobody in this magic-obsessed world had ever even dared to dream of. And the kicker, the protagonist had no clue. So just a few days later, he reviewed the prepared sheets and stared at them in shock, stunned by what he found. It was real paper rough under his fingers, and that gritty texture made the whole thing feel special. He measured every sheet, cut them to the exact same size, threaded them with a stone needle, and stitched it all tight. Then he held up his creation with a grin and shouted, "The diary is ready." The protagonist clutched it to his chest and basked in that huge earned rush of accomplishment. After all, trial and error turned making his creation into pure adrenaline. Then he went even further. He ground up the clay charcoal he found, rolled it into a charcoal pencil, and wrapped it tight with scraps of paper. Then he declared, grinning like he'd just won finally. He'd be rid of those tablets. Marcia watched him and said he looked so happy, and he just smiled back. Because once your options widen, everything feels brighter. The spirit leaned in and said she had some news about a rare ingredient. He's going to be dying to know, right? MC practically couldn't wait. And then, "Wait, what's the ingredient?" She grinned, held up a maple leaf, and shouted, "That's it." Yuri blinked in shock. "Wait, a leaf. Could it actually be food?" Then the spirit told him the truth. The sap of this tree was actually used. He stared at the tree sap, and the shape told him everything. Maple syrup was in the spotlight. Then the protagonist hit the evaluation button and confirmed, without a doubt, that his hunch was right. He said, "No question, this is a sugar maple leaf, the very sap that turns into that legendary syrup. So in this world, they call it maple. Does that mean the tree is growing somewhere nearby too?" Marcia shrugged and said, "Hard to tell. I just stumbled on some fallen leaves by chance." Still, she pushed him. "It's worth checking, right?" Then the protagonist shrugged it off. Maybe it was for the best, because stressing over the future was pointless. Yet deep down, he already knew he was destined for this. He was psyching himself up for pancakes, and before he even realized it, he'd been pulled into this whole adventure like it was nothing, staring at the spirit, whose whole vibe screamed, "I've got a scheme brewing," burst into laughter and said, "Most likely, with that sugar in hand, she'd finally do what she'd been dreaming of, make him whip up alcohol for her." A while later, while MC and his allies hunted for answers, he leaned in and told Omochi and Sakura, "Good thing you were close by." Nearby, he couldn't stumble into something like that by luck, and he never expected them both to choose his place for the winter. Actually, the birds had already spent the whole winter under Yuri's roof. They warned him the trip was rough and deadly, but he fed them every day, and they were safe. With an embarrassed grin, the protagonist muttered, "Yeah, I get it now, Trust." And right then, the birds cut in and told him they'd arrived, pointing straight at a maple tree stood there, though they insisted it was a sap tree, and the protagonist burst out, "Wow, look at that majesty," as they kept coming. He crept closer, stared at the bark, and growled that those gouges had to be a monster's claw marks. The sap was already dripping out. MC swiped a finger through the sticky ooze, licked it, and caught a faintly sweet taste. If that nectar got harvested and boiled right, it could whip up an excellent syrup. Easy, right? One tiny snag, this tree grew all alone right here, untouched by anything else. There were no other trees around, and if they drained too much sap, that poor tree would just wither on the spot, so he pushed carefully, trying to widen it a little. He widened the cut, then slipped in a tiny branch of his own. After a short wait, Yuri snapped, "What a problem!" and then asked how much sap a single tree can produce. Isn't cutting it for both his cooking and Marcia's booze, and once that tree dies, it's over. They won't get another, and they'll have to gamble with dangerous risks. When he finally made it home, the spirit shot him a question. Did he pull any sap out? They needed answers fast. He dove into making alcohol at full speed, then burst out laughing at her predictable reaction, asking what he was up to, while he grinned and said he was taking cuttings, chopping up several fresh maple shoots. He slashed the shoot so it could sink into the ground, take root, and grow into a real tree, and then he hacked back the leaves. They trimmed the edge so no extra water or nutrients went to waste, then sliced the planting tip at a sharp angle to help the roots take off. Yeah, that one. They just walk up and tap into sap at their own doorstep. And Marcia, totally baffled, told him it sounded like forever, like it was taking ages. He nodded and said, "Yeah, about as long as an oak tree takes to turn into a table." So Marcia shot him another confused look. "Wait, what did you even say?" And the MC answered, "What's unclear?" The moment the syrup caught fire to that heat, he blurted, It's really starting to boil. Now, you don't have to stress about what happens to his resume next. Yuri watched the sap start to boil, stirring it like a mad scientist. Then she said, if you evaporate it down to the 140th part of its volume, you'll get syrup. That's unreal, Marcia exploded in outrage. How much, she demanded. You'll end up with almost nothing left. So he clocked that detail, then immediately decided to slip the current batch into alcohol. Because of course he would. Spirit stared at him like, wait, what did you just say? He truly agreed to it, but everyone knew those cuttings would take decades to grow until he promised to crank the tree's magic to speed everything up, so they wouldn't be stuck waiting forever. And the shock was, he only learned about you, Paul, because of her. Spirit said his name with pure gratitude. She figured everything was running perfectly until the protagonist corrected her. He wasn't saving it for later. He was totally hoarding that syrup for pancakes. Cakes, except he had 0 eggs and no milk at all, so she could only cling to the idea of his generosity. A few hours later, the syrup finally hit ready, and MC burst out in pure awe. This color, this scent, real maple, or maybe that magical maple syrup. Yuri took a tiny sip, and his face lit up like he'd just struck gold. He couldn't stop grinning. Every bite was unbelievably delicious. A proud, deep, life-filling joy swallowed him whole. This was it, the real taste of happiness, and he couldn't wait to try. Marcia shot daggers with her eyes and demanded he try again. Then Yuri snapped back. Yeah, I remember the alcohol, I remembered. He remembers, and as he keeps pulling strings, he leans in and orders, dilute the syrup with water. Keep the water at around 20 degrees, then let it sit for a couple of days because the juice contains the real reason. Wild yeast, so it'll actually take off and ferment just like mead, but made the lapel way, and yeah, it really does distill them. Or something like that will probably be needed later, but they'll reach those heavy moments soon enough. Marcia said she was staring. I couldn't wait then. After a while, he finally grabbed the vial and told the spirit. And just like that, this is what played out a few days later. He figured it was that same incomprehensible junk again. Then the protagonist took one sniff, smiled, and said it smelled amazing. He scooped the contents into a tiny cup and handed it to. He held it up to her and let her try a sip. Marcia took one look, drank it in, and lit up with pure joy, thrilled that she hadn't felt that way in ages. Felt like I hadn't breathed this hard in forever. Then he barked, "Thank you so much," and laughed like it hit him all at once. His efforts still hadn't gone to waste. It hadn't been for nothing. There was only a tiny bit left. So let her sip it little by little, and the spirit burst out laughing. Of course! But that same evening, she gulped every last drop dry. The very next day, she sighed in regret. Booze, where is it? And the MC shot back. I drank it myself before the spirit, sobbing, pleaded with him. He told her how many years it would take to get the next batch, and he couldn't miss how she'd gone pale again. Yuri snapped that there was no point in drowning in despair, so she should just stare out the window the new meatball they'd planted not long ago had. Marcia blinked in shock, because they'd already grown so much, and just a few days ago, too. Back then, it was nothing but a branch, and the protagonist swore that tree magic was doing way more than he'd ever imagined, as if its growth was about to explode into something huge. He pushes it harder, more magic in means more speed out, so he didn't realize the power until he tried it on potato seedlings and watched them shoot up like nothing he'd seen before. And just like that, she stared at the result. The spirit erupted. Now I finally get it. This forest monsters are colossal because they're built that way. And that's why every bite tastes so juicy and wild, and her health was actually in great shape too. Perfect, he snapped. And the spirit cut in, no, really. Told him this whole mess started with the dense mana choking this forest. MC was just, Marcia gaped. Was there mana literally hanging in the air? She confirmed it with her own eyes. Plus, it leans on the fact that animals and plants get hit hard by it too. Mana stirred within her, and then she snapped. If he injects mana pumped around the clock, and the juice got yanked out at lightning speed. Quickly, he shot back that he wouldn't do it, then said that if he didn't, even more questions would explode. Why had the old residents ditched those perfect lands? Marcia hesitated, but she said it because the monsters were strong. Yuri flicked her hand like, come on, this isn't nonsense monsters. Even a kid could wipe out, but that wasn't why Spirit was sure he'd just lost his mind. He added that if there was another village nearby, they could figure out why she snapped back. Aren't there? Because she hadn't seen a single living soul. Ever since she'd shown up, he couldn't shake the thought that curiosity gets people hurt, so he decided not to poke around. Still, if this place was deserted after the cataclysm, he'd better brace himself. After a while, Sucker finally told him about another human village. The birds shot upward, and Emochi called out, "Let her see. It really is a village." The protagonist nearly froze. People actually live there. The bird snapped back, "Nope, there aren't any. It's been abandoned for ages." He went quiet, thinking hard. That means there's another abandoned village out there beyond this one. And until he uncovers the truth, his anxiety just keeps clawing at him. Anxiety wouldn't let him breathe, so he hurried to ask his pets if they'd take him there. And the birds shot back, "No problem." While Marcia just asked, she blinked, totally confused. "Wait, where?" And he told her there was an abandoned village nearby, just waiting to be uncovered. So he was heading in to explore, and the spirit could only wish him a safe, lucky journey. As he walked off, she kept her eyes on him, hanging on to the way he talked to the birds, wondering if this kid could really understand them, because his mana and spell count were nowhere near what a normal human had, and if he ever wound up in the wrong. After a quick debate, she finally decided they'd snatch him up in a flash and haul him around in a cage. Since it was an abandoned village, he wouldn't run into anybody, so he let himself breathe, and she headed off to catch a quick nap. Then the MC showed up and stared at destroyed houses. He knocked on those houses and demanded to know if it was the second village, because there was nothing left standing. And it had been deserted long before his own village ever fell. When he stared at the building materials, he realized the houses had rotted into nothing. Suddenly, something sparkled on the ground, shiny as could be. Yuri froze a coin. Was this local money? She leaned in, and the details, if she looked closely, were a bunch of useful stuff got left behind, and he scooped up anything that might help him. Then he grabbed his haul and studied every single find, only to realize they came with a pickaxe, a hammer, and a pouch of coins. He grinned, calling it a solid haul, even as everything around them looked rusty as hell. He was seconds away from grabbing metal. Then he sifted through the coins and froze gold, silver, and even copper were all mixed in. Among them, he had a decent stash too, and if the moment ever hit, he'd spend it. They were already unclaimed, waiting in the shadows. Staring at that tiny bag, he decided right then and there to put it to the test. Maybe some dark influence was messing with it, because the analysis didn't find poison or a curse. It found a magical bag, an artifact that it could have stored a lot, but right then it refused to work. Mana was all gone. The protagonist shrugged and said, "Magical gear lasts. It'll help around the farm," and he'd study it later. At that exact moment, his pets raced in and announced they'd struck food, then proudly showed him soybeans. He praised them on the spot, yanked open the pod, and checked the fruit himself. Yep, soybeans, just like the ones back on Earth. Turns out this was a win. They'll make your soil better, but you've got to tend it like crazy, because repeated plantings can strip the ground bare. Then the protagonist bursts out, "Wait, is that really what's here? Soybeans are miso, so that's where soy sauce comes from. Sauce, tofu. This is our shot at rebuilding the roots of Japanese culture in this world, and the options are exploding wide open. But if we keep growing everything in the same patch, the soil will drain out fast and sickness will move in." So yeah, this meant the spot could become a second field, and it looked like there was way more growing here than just soybeans. Then he leaned in and said, "Real quick, don't celebrate yet. This is way too early, and the mystery of the villagers vanishing only got stranger and stranger." Like, what if they just abandoned? He ditched so many crucial items and vanished whatever he feared had to be terrifying. Was it a freak natural disaster? Or the handiwork of some unknown, unstoppable monster? And yeah, the questions piled up fast. But it was clear there weren't any answers waiting for him, and staying here was a death sentence. So he shoved the moment aside, grabbed himself, and hauled off before anything happened. Now he had to map out a plan to beef up his home's defenses, while far away in the village of N, just a few dozen kilometers off while everything else was going down, villagers packed into the council hall, staring at the chaos, utterly baffled. Wait, could it be true that Luca, the monster who ruled the forest, just vanished? That's wild, because for generations she owned that place. And if the villagers are left with nothing but broken, empty ruins, then Yeah, it was all because of her. But if that rumor turned out true, they'd burst with joy after decades. They'd finally get their hands back on the forest's riches. Odell, the village elder, declared they had to start prepping. For reconnaissance, it honestly felt like they had to see it for themselves. After a bit, they finally headed out. Then one villager leaned toward his buddies and demanded, "You think everything is going to be okay?" This was his first time venturing this far from their village, and his comrade tried to calm him down. "Don't panic, don't be so scared," because that forest was brutal, and the most powerful. Powerful monsters stayed locked in the depths, never venturing out, just a quick scout, then right back into the dark. Odell said the odds of running into creatures like that were basically nothing. Yet, they'd barely gone far before it was time to stay on high alert. He started to believe their harvests were shrinking every single season, and if they didn't change fast, real famine would finally slam the door. Those wild forest lands might be the only chance they've got, because this man had never gone this far from the village before. Not once. He turned to his comrades and snapped. "How much farther?" They reassured him. "Just over that hill, then we're there." And that's when the crew of a bunch of villagers sprinted over the hill, then froze in total shock, and out of their mouths burst out loud cries. "No way, a rabid boar. Tell me this monster isn't real right now." They bolted out of the forest thicket, desperate to escape fast because they had to throw up a smokescreen right now. Wait, did the monsters just blow their territory wide open like that? If so, they won't need reconnaissance anymore. Meanwhile, as the protagonist darted through the forest, snatching up all kinds of crops, he muttered, "This has to be checked too." Lately, he'd barely run into a single monster, so he could roam without fear. And for once, the silence felt downright comforting until that quiet stretched too far. Violence flared like a warning siren. There was no way his hunt could be wiped them out clean. Omochi and Sakura, their relatives, clung to a branch and told them straight up, more islands of safety were scattered around them. Omochi said Yuri was terrifyingly strong, and Sakura swore even the fiercest predators shook when he showed up. Then Omochi repeated it again, like the truth hit too hard to ignore. Just a bit over a year had slipped by since Yuri got reincarnated into this world, and the order in the forest was still stuck on one terrifying idea they once considered. A deadly place had been twisted into something unrecognizable, and suddenly the animals started fleeing his settlement like it was cursed until the Luca. The old masters of these lands vanished without a trace, and when they were gone, fresh monsters surged into the plains, ripping through the thickets and splitting everything apart. Pickets surged from the other villages, and just like that, humans got even fewer chances to reach those lands, which became more and more unreachable than ever. For years, the protagonist's home stayed buried from prying eyes until one day something finally broke the silence, and he was out there gathering fire. With a flick of his blade, he split firewood like a pro then, on the 5th year of his life in this other world, after he'd smashed through a whole pile of fuel supplies. He finally said, "But I think that's enough for today." Marcia jabbed a finger at his weapon and gasped, "That thing is insanely sharp." And he smirked, "Yeah, it's forged with earth magic. The more mana he dumps into the steel, the deeper it slices, then it roars louder. And it's time for lunch while he's prepping them." While he was eating, the MC suddenly drifted back over everything he'd cooked up through the years. Like that meat ferment he'd dubbed almost soy sauce. And the smell was so good he blurts it out loud on the spot. Marcia shot back, but you could tell she wasn't into it. Spirit took a sip from her cup, and right then she let out a satisfied gasp over her bold wild apple cider. Yuri figured it was exactly her style, and that meant he couldn't stand for it, so he whipped up handy household tools and even cooked up unheard-of vegetables. But his biggest, that wall was his weapon, stretching nearly a full kilometer in radius around the settlement, and it somehow looked like it could keep everything out and everyone in. This looming barrier looked like an unbreakable citadel, like nothing on Earth could ever get past it until, for years, this eerie giant buried in the forest stayed unseen by anyone. Until right now. For years, Odell and his granddaughter Donna had been on the run until today, when they finally stumbled right into the protagonist's settlement, fresh out of danger. The monsters chasing them moments ago suddenly fell silent, and they looked up to the heavens like Odell had just cheated death, because there it was, a towering, mighty wall. Odell blurted, eyes wide. "What kind of marvel is this? Where did this thing come from?" Donna stared at her grandfather, totally baffled, and blurted out, "Didn't he know these lands years ago? Or had a fresh settlement popped up here while he was gone? The old man pressed his palm to the wall, and his eyes widened. This craftsmanship was unreal, the kind of colossal build that must have demanded insane resources and brute effort, like something terrifyingly powerful was stationed just. Donna fired off an alarm. What? Invaders were really storming their lands? Odell snapped back that they couldn't brush it off. They had to. To deliver their findings fast, his granddaughter immediately agreed to run back and report everything. Right then, the protagonist locked eyes with them from the observation point and blurted out in shock, "Wait, what is this?" Odell and Donna gawked at him, totally stunned, while the protagonist stood there. Dragunov's detection skill flared to life, and he raced to investigate. Then reality blindsided him with people standing there. Rage boiled in his veins. He couldn't even make sense of it. Is this kid really him? Who in their right mind would dare raise children in all that chaos? So they were really trapped in a deadly forest. MC's mind raced, trying to figure out what he could do next. What if it got so bad they started grumbling like, "Yeah, he built this place, so what? He doesn't trust it not one bit, and he has to destroy it right now." The elder thought, if this boy, the kid shouts for the adults, because if they don't hurry, they're toast. So what are they supposed to do? They made that decision on the spot, no turning back, and bowed to each other at the exact same moment, begging forgiveness with every ounce of regret and mercy. Then they both stared back at each other, shocked. Yuri swung the gate open, blurted out an apology, "My fun, apology," and admitted he never thought he'd run into anyone here. Odell cut him off. No, and that's how the confusion hit so hard. Turns out they jumped to conclusions. They even talked about religion, begging for his forgiveness, and Donna just stared like, "I can't believe anyone actually lives out here in this forest." Forest, thank goodness. They actually understood each other. And right then, the protagonist realized, wait, I thought I was a fright. Terrified that if the locals turned on him, he'd be forced to throw hands. But those two didn't look even remotely like troublemakers. But what were they even trying to pull off where they lost too? He had to get every answer, so he leaned in and asked, "Did you have—" Odell showed up with business on his mind, but when he answered, it was a sharp no, because all of this was just dumb luck. They were only passing through, and they'd come from the nearby village of End. The protagonist stepped forward and nailed the question. Then the village's old man nodded and confirmed him. He thrust out his hand with a chunk of fruit and said they were hunting for food. Then monsters came sprinting, and they barely slipped away. The MC snapped, "That's it, I've got it," then yanked the gate wider and ushered them in. Yuri noticed it was rude to stand there on the threshold, so he urged them to step inside. And even though the uninvited guests looked stunned, they still agreed. Yuri figured this way they wouldn't try to run. Sprint for help, and maybe this was the opening she needed to pry out answers. Donna leaned into her grandfather and whispered, Is he really sure? Because that plan could get him killed." Odell told her her refusal wouldn't change a thing, but that meant there was still a shot to talk and stay alive. He scanned the area, and then it hit him. This place was dead silent, like not a soul was left. The buildings were totally wrecked beyond living, but the fields were still kept so perfectly neat it didn't make sense. "What did that even mean?" he blurted out, asking the protagonist if he could talk to the adults. Then the protagonist stared back, stunned. "There aren't any. Mine. He's got the whole place to himself, just the old man and his granddaughter. No one else around." The granddaughter went totally wide-eyed, and the old man blurted out, baffled, "What is this? This? No way. There's no surviving alone in a forest this deadly. Tell me this can a kid really keep an entire area under watch all by himself?" MC shot back. "You might not believe it, but it's real." This old man wouldn't stop shouting how confused he was, and Yuri finally snapped, "There has to be someone who built this wall. He forged it with earth magic." And Odell's jaw dropped in total disbelief, because what in the world was he even talking about? And the protagonist just couldn't make sense of it. He couldn't believe the way they freaked out over a wall he figured even he could build. Yet somehow he still couldn't wrap his head around him. Kids usually can't handle this kind of job, so adults team up and power through it together to get it done fast. He blurted that he was alone, so he had to finish it by himself, and it dragged on, demanding every ounce of time and effort. Donna stared, baffled, because, yeah, it actually took 10 whole days, and the guy looked younger than her. Yet he'd already survived more than anyone his age should ever face. Odell watched the kid and knew this wasn't luck. Talent and pure grit were all over him, like he'd been grinding for years just to land this kind of win. Man, what a calm kid, he questioned him, asking why he was stuck all alone in a place like that, and the protagonist. He stared at the moment and thought, this is the question. He knew when he met that person they'd ask him. So he'd already cooked up a backstory, then blurted it out loud. He didn't even know where he was born, and for as long as he could remember. He and his grandpa had always been nomads, surviving one day at a time until about 5 years ago when they stumbled on this abandoned village and decided to stay because it finally gave them shelter from the brutal weather one day. His grandpa rode off to grab supplies and never came back. Something had to go wrong out there, but in his heart, he swore he'd return someday, and he just kept waiting right here. He tried to brush it off with awkward lies, praying they'd buy it, then boom, the guests erupted into tears. Donna sobbed and wiped her face, apologizing for dragging up his past, and Odell wiped even more away. Tears welled in his eyes, and he couldn't help but show how loyal he really was. MC felt crushed with shame, but at the same time they looked like genuinely good people, and he couldn't even shake that weird, awkward feeling. The old man leaned in and asked if those beautiful fields were his grandfather's. Doing too, Yuri nodded and said, "Yeah, I'd take care of them now," as he caught himself mid-sentence. He learned everything the old man taught him about farming, and when the elder leaned in, curious, he asked for a closer look. "Sure," the protagonist said. The old man crouched by the plants, staring in awe, and blurted, "Amazing, these leaves are so lush. In this soil, it's rare. It's rare to stumble on soil this rich," so the protagonist asked Odell if he was a farmer too, and Odell snapped back that he was, because their whole village lives and breathes off agriculture. But lately, crop failures have swept the whole country, and even their village is teetering on the edge of famine. Ramen was the goal, so they gambled their lives to hunt for food while the MC stared outside, totally baffled by what was happening. The old man straight up asked if he could even handle a harvest that huge alone, and Yuri stepped up with a confident, "Yeah, I've got this." But there was still some left. Odell admitted it, looking guilty, and said, "I've got a proposition," while the protagonist shot back, "Prove it." "They're trying to get the harvest, right?" the elder shot back. "Yeah, that too, but it wouldn't be free." Still, he had one more request. He'd been farming for so long that the fields basically knew him because the land and harvest out here were on a whole other level compared to his village. It was probably because his skill had shattered the too young limit. So hey, could he come to the village and lend them a hand with what he can do? The antagonist snapped out in shock, then blurted the one thing he told him the moment the guests stepped into his house. He ordered them to yank off their shoes right at the doorstep, then step inside, so the old man did exactly that, and he muttered, "Take off your shoes, how strange." The MC gestured to a bench they could sit on, right in front of a sun-browned bearskin, and Odell couldn't help admiring how gorgeous the fur looked, while the room itself was spotless too. Then Yuri went around asking the guests what they wanted to drink. But all he had was water, so the elder passed, while Donna lit up and agreed, saying, just what they needed after sprinting from monsters. Their throats were dust dry, the guests gulped the water, and the old man muttered, "On." He admired the beautiful dishes, then turned to the protagonist, thanked them for the hospitality, and introduced his granddaughter, revealing her name. The protagonist answered with his own name, and Donna lit up. "Nice to meet you." And the MC instantly turned red with embarrassment. Embarrassment hit him hard. He never saw the conversation spiraling like that. He totally reciprocated her feelings, then realized the village he didn't plan to go to was where he'd end up. He pushed towards it anyway, ready to hear these people out and sling them real advice, wondering out loud if the fish of the village harvest was a total disaster, and honestly, he had no clue what was going on beyond its walls, because Odell said that for someone living in seclusion, that kind of ignorance is normal until you realize the real nightmare. A food shortage is tearing through the entire country. Yuri blurted his questions, and the old man finally explained this whole country is a patchwork of cities and countless villages. The cities feed and grow on trade and industry, while the villages scrape by selling their harvest to the cities through merchants until war with other countries hits. And when the monster attacks hit, the fields crumbled into ruin, and the cities started running low, cut off from the supplies they needed, leaving every village to suffer too, because the only reason the townspeople ate was gone year after year. Their crops failed, and nothing could stop the decline. Therefore, so they had to gamble with their lives just to hunt down food. The protagonist thought about it for a second. Why not just go hunting? Maybe it was tied to their beliefs or religion, but he didn't dare ask. Then he blurted out what they even grew back home. And Odell said, "Root vegetables and wheat, we've been growing that stuff for ages." The protagonist frowned and asked, "That's it?" The elder stared back, baffled and shot. "What do you mean? What do?" MC said he was talking about stuff like legumes, soybeans, for example, and that he'd actually seen them growing wild here. But the old man blurted in pure amazement. Soybeans, he couldn't believe it, since they're supposed to be poisonous. Yuri froze at the answer, then quickly asked for permission to inspect what they'd collected. Once he got the green light, he opened his bag, unpacked everything, and started noting what he saw. He figured the forest had to hide more food than just what he found. Sure, there were plenty of things out there, but all he kept spotting were berries and then acorns. "No, dagunuts. Don't they eat those?" Donna blurted it out, shocked. "That's a weird question," she snapped. "They're bitter, they wreck your stomach, and they'll poison you, so nobody should touch them." Suddenly, everything clicked for the protagonist. These folks are painfully conservative, and they're terrified that one wrong bite will get them poisoned. They learned the hard way not to even think about chewing something that looked inedible, because when monsters roam everywhere, taking risks only makes sense when you have no other choice. But if they don't switch up their plan, the village is doomed, and now that he finally knows what's going on, he has to act fast. He had to step in, promise them, "I'll be right back," and then he bolted. After a while, the protagonist dashed over with a bowl and offered it up. Odell scooped up a serving of food for them right as the guest leaned in, hungry for a taste. He reached for the spoon and blurted, stunned, "Wait, what is this?" Donna blurted, "I can't believe I've never seen something like this." The smell hit first. "Wait, is this really maple?" Nectar, what an insanely rare luxury. The second they tasted it, joy and delight lit up every face, and they started devouring it like it was pure heaven. Odell beamed and shouted, "Now that's a masterpiece, crispy outside, melts soft inside, and so chewy it stretches forever." Donna squealed, and both of them practically floated with, "It's delicious." MC leaned in and told him it was starch dango. Then he proved it, pulling the starch from the dago fruit and mixing it with the other ingredients. The elder gasped in shock. Yuri had gone and shown them starch powder, just like that. And then he said, "Mix it with water and salt. Throw it in the pan, and boom, this dish is born. You got to grind up starch-rich plants, wrap them in cloth, and rinse them with water to pull out the powder. Now get ready, because to find the starch seeps right through the cloth, sinks to the bottom, and you've got to pour off the top muddy water, rinse again, and keep repeating until the sediment turns chalky white. Then you dry it all, and boom, powder." The old man stared in pure disbelief. "No way. It tastes real, but it is made from bitter dago fruits. So don't expect that nectar, sweet flavor, because the fruits themselves aren't bitter at all, actually. They're a little sweet." The protagonist said, "Soak them in water to wipe out the bitterness, and boom, they're delicious." Odell stared, thunderstruck. "How in the world do you know all this?" He smiled and told the elder, "I learned it from my grandfather." Odell blinked. Yeah, sure, a convenient storybook grandfather. Then Odell snapped that he had to come to the village, and Donna caught on instantly. His know-how would be priceless. The protagonist's thoughts spiraled. Well, that's it. I can't wiggle out now. They were pressing him hard, and honestly, he was curious too. He wanted to see how these people really lived. And yeah, knowing the local ropes will save him later. So sure, be careful, but don't go around distrusting everyone. He stared them down and said, "All right." Then while he was waving his guests off, he promised Marcia he'd help them later. Once the harvest is done and the fields go quiet, they head straight for End Village, and she whips around in shock. "Will you be back soon?" But he just stares, stunned, so it's clear she's not going with him too. Then the spirit blurts out, "Please forgive me," because she'd already told him only a few people would recognize her, and everyone else would just call her a nuisance again. She'd been waiting right here, so she told him to go ahead and leave her some food. Confused, MC nodded, then blurted, "Okay, but how am I supposed to open the lids on the wine or the potions?" Marcia shot back that he had nothing to worry about, because she'd potion herself. She could tear open the spellwork and pull out what was inside. After all, she was the spirit of wine. Yuri was like, wait, she can do that. Then the spirit just chuckled and told him, yeah, it's even better when someone pours for her. He nearly choked on pure outrage at how cunning she was. Then 3 months slipped on since that promise to hit the village of N before summer was over. And one day, a hard knock slammed the gate, and when the protagonist stepped out, he found his new allies waiting right behind them. People rode in a cart. Odell beamed like he'd been waiting forever, and Donna's face lit up the moment she saw him too. They stared at each other, shocked it had been so long, and the driver kept glancing around like danger was lurking right around the corner. He asked if they'd made it here without a single problem, and the elder nodded, claiming the monster-repelling amulet he'd given him was the reason, stuffed with scented Lucca bird balls made from the bird's own poop. MC grinned and said it was all set, time to go. Then the old man demanded to see the harvest he planned to deliver to the village. So Yuri whipped out the magic bag. She clutched the bag and told him, don't worry, everything you need is right here inside. Donna gasped in shock. What? How on earth could all of that fit in there? And seriously, what kind of bag is that? Climbing into the cart, he told them, I grabbed a few more things, everything else. I'll fetch in the village. Potatoes spilled at the bottom of the cart as he jabbed at the bag, and everyone stared because he swore it belonged to his grandfather, convinced he had finally done the right thing by repairing this. That magical object he snagged from some other abandoned village saved his skin. Now he didn't have to reveal his storage magic. And he swore he'd keep those special skills and magic locked down as a secret. Odell snapped his gaze his way and, out of nowhere, asked if he could spill how he cooked soybeans, because the last time they met, they never even got around to it. There are a bunch of methods, but the quickest is heating straight up, and the old man's jaw dropped. Wait, that's it. He couldn't believe it, since his ancestors had warned him not to eat them. But then turns out it was. To make it simple, the protagonist leaned in and swore legumes were amazing plants. And he believed the real key to farming was nitrogen, because crop yield and growth rise or fall with how much nitrogen the soil holds. Legumes suck nitrogen straight out of the air because friendly bacteria camp out in their roots and do the dirty work. When the legume plants soak up extrusion residues, they can kickstart soil fertility. Again, just bury the leftover crop in the ground like a natural fertilizer. It's not like, oh, there's no way they'll get any of this. So he yanked out a bean pod and declared, all right, let's start rotating in legumes with the crops. After harvest, he buries the leaves, stems, and even the unripe fruit in the soil, and somehow, even tired, depleted land bounces back. He's done it every single year, just like his grandfather. Donna leaned in and asked who his relative was, and Odell, still thoughtful, hoped everything was okay. Then when he came back, he decided it was smart to leave someone from their village behind so his grandson would be safe. MC just smiled and shut it down. Don't worry about it. He'd slipped him a note, and there was no way he could explain that his grandfather was gone for good. After a moment, Donna blurted, there she is, and the girl spun toward the protagonist and said, welcome. Welcome to their village. He gasped at what he saw. He'd thought it would be about the same size as his own, but it was. But it was way bigger and way more alive than he ever expected people were everywhere. Hustling and bursting with energy, workers swarmed every corner, tools flying while everyone around them cheered the elder on and shouted their praise. When he came back, he jabbed a finger at the protagonist and demanded, wait, is this Yuri? Then he told him, go on, introduce yourself to them. The villagers filled MC in on just how amazing it all was. He'd finally arrived and, yeah, he really lived in that terrifying forest. Yuri felt his cheeks burn. Everyone kept staring at him. He quickly asked Donna if they could head straight to the field, and the girl just broke into laughter. Odell told him to slow down, saying he was already there, so he might as well play with the village kids, but the protagonist shut it down hard. When they finally reached the field, he stared at the dirt and the sickly grass and snapped, so that's what we've got. So that's the truth. Earth really is breaking down, and it's not just the soil running dry. The magic in the air is thin too, with hardly any magical elements left. And even the elder said it with a heavy, defeated sigh. It's crazy everything flourishes when the soil is packed with magic. And when that man nearby added more, they had hope. But places like that also lure monsters. so they had to make do with depleted land. MC eyed wood magic like a lifeline, but the villagers didn't even have it, and if it was just a stopgap, what good would it do? Magical stuff should only boost crops. So if that's the goal, you fix the land itself faster, safer, guaranteed then, he blurted out on the way here. He'd spotted a bunch of wild plants that could have saved the day, but they weren't being used here, and he promised he'd teach everyone how to use them. He even knew how to make the land fertile without magic. But that meant ripping up the way people had always done things. Then he stared at the crowd of assembled. Odell turned to the villagers and blurted, "You ready for this?" And the guy next to him chimed in, "That's why they called you, so we can start working right now." The whole village erupted into cheers, hands shooting up as hope surged for a better life. Just like that, the revival of N Village began. They brought the locals last year's soybean seeds, pointed out fairly that they should have been planted a month ago, but there's still time. Hit the field fast and pour fresh life into it. And the villagers, happily, he backed it up, and soon they were planting side by side. Then the protagonist told him, "Give it about a week, those first shoots will pop up." And to keep the soil from getting wiped out, they couldn't replant this field again until 3 whole years had passed, so they'd only follow with soybeans. Managing 3 plots meant he could rotate the crops every year like clockwork, and the villagers stared in total shock. He was way wiser than anyone expected. Then, all shy, he asked if they should try planting ricola, the tubers they use for starch, calling it the earthly cousin of the flower licorice radiata, and the villagers just stood there baffled, wondering what kind of starch that even was. Then one of them burst out, "Isn't this the exact ingredient for dango that Odell swore by, though those ricola tubers are deadly poisonous?" The protagonist steadied everyone and warned them with careful precision. With the poison finally gone, no trouble was left yet. The man still couldn't wrap his head around this dango. The elder had basically described it like a slime that refused to be swallowed, and the MC couldn't help thinking, yeah, that's an awful comparison. He yanked out the prepared dish and told the villagers he had brought enough for them to taste Urski Noir. Their trust was a little shaky, but he swore it was safe, and the moment they took a bite, their faces lit up, yelling how delicious it was. Mouth-watering, right? Odell and Donna just grinned as they watched their fellow compatriots. The villagers stared in disbelief, jaws dropping at how something that intense could even be born from a poisonous plant. Yuri spoke up, frozen in awe. They said this plant was perfect for the field borders because its poison wards off underground pests, and it even spreads on its own, so you barely have to lift a finger. The villagers threw their full support behind his idea and were itching to start planting right away, and he made sure to remind them to wash their hands like crazy after touching the plants because he truly believed the village's food trouble would ease a bit from here. Even though nerves hit him at first, showing up here was the right move. Then the next morning, he woke up, stretched like a cat, and thanked Donna for the soft bed, and that he'd slept like a rock, so the girl figured he must have been completely wiped out from yesterday. Then gasped that he managed all of that in just one day, and She flashed a smile like good deeds always strike first, and as Donna stepped out the door, she muttered that yesterday nearly wiped her out, so tonight she was setting up a welcoming party, and Yuri had better come with her, because Yuri was completely stunned. She shot wide-eyed this morning. "Right now, follow me," she demanded, dragging him to the table where the villagers were already waiting. And they blurted, "He's hungry, yeah, then let him go eat as much as you want." She kept shrinking back, all shy, and honestly, this welcome party felt way too modest. Then the protagonist stared at the table, stunned. Surprise barked, "No, stop right there." And just like that, it was over for him. Then he stared at one of the dishes and blurted, baffled, "Wait, is that meat? I thought they said they never ate that." "What kind of meat is this?" Donna snapped at him. "This is from Amir, that animal." He stared in shock. Yesterday he'd spotted these super common cattle-like animals roaming the world. Their wool prized so highly it fetches a fortune. In their village, everyone raises them the same way. Then the girl leaned in and grinned. Meat is the real treasure for them. They guard it and only enjoy it on special occasions. He was thrown off, like his own secret plan had been made just for him. And before he could figure it out, Donna kept pushing forward, introducing dish after dish, until she pointed to the soup and said, "It's made from dried meat." He said, then pushed for us to start the meal, and after tasting the soup, He swore that goat meat has a sharp, unforgettable aroma. He blurted in shock, digging into that soup, no smell at all, just pure deliciousness, and Odell grinned, saying they soaked the meat in alcohol first to kill the odor and make it way more tender. MC went, "Oh, so that's it," realizing he never knew alcohol was this powerful. Then later he tried to talk them into giving some for cooking, thinking Marcia would be thrilled too. Yuri insisted they said meat was precious, yet they only eat goat here, and hunting monsters could have meant extra food, but the elders snapped back, saying they'd try if they could, except they don't have the right weapons, and the people they've got aren't skilled enough to fight. Sometimes they smash through the monsters that come pounding the village, but it's barely enough, and everyone knows it. The protagonist is still totally clueless, and he even thinks the locals, who have to be stronger than, he's stuck, and we can't push back at all. Maybe those things are dragons, or worse, what if a monster swings for him next? He blurts, "Can't they hide?" Donna blinked, totally confused. "Just hire someone who can fight." With that kind of money, wealthy settlements can snap up adventurers too. But their village can't pay for it, and one villager snaps that strong fighters cost a fortune. Yet the girl points out that sometimes adventurers crash in town for the night. Odell said that when those monsters show up, they waste no time. Right then and there, they rush in as a loud gong blast. A weird sound cut through the air. Everyone snapped into panic. Then the protagonist blurted, totally lost, "What is it?" Donna answered him right away. "It's the monster's warning." One lookout screamed, "It's coming!" From the watchtower right there in the sky. From the tower, slam the gates shut. "Women and kids, go home. Now every person who can lift a weapon, hold the line at the gates," the girl called. MC followed her, and he muttered, "Yeah, they're used to this." Then his eyes narrowed. What kind of monster puts on a smile and expects people to fall in line? One villager threw a shout up to the lookout, "Who's out there?" And the guard answered. One lone monocorn charges forward, but what the heck is lurking right behind him? The villagers leaned in and burst out laughing. "It's a trade caravan. Those are the footsteps of fortune." Yuri is thrown into total confusion. An actual trade caravan out here. Donna's asking the same terrifying question. Will they make it? She smiled at him and said, "Don't worry. Trade caravans always roll with adventurers as guards, and that's exactly who we are." Those steps had rescued their village again and again. Pure footsteps of fortune, right when they needed them most. The protagonist froze in shock, like he just stumbled onto a real-life band of adventure. Reverse, he couldn't stop wanting to see them if he climbed that watchtower. Maybe he'd... Donna lunged toward him, shouting that the children were already bolting right past the battlefield. He barreled after them, desperate to stop their advance. Koodle and his squad closing in fast. The monster, yeah, this one was a monocorn, and the commander told everyone exactly that. Corn Bear, the villagers couldn't stand it. Then they burst in at the exact right moment, and he hadn't even finished calling their... He bellowed out the steps of fortune to his squad. "Finish this enemy off in one brutal swoop, or all of this is for nothing." Dahlia shot forward, let them close in, drew her arrow, and then slammed Shadow into action right now. She unleashed a shadow lock on the enemy, then snapped, "Cuddle," and the bay erupted. That grizzly won't move because Katra's magic supercharged the squad, and as they barreled forward, Cuddle roared at the enemy, "Now you'll get it!" And then it all went through. They managed to land a successful strike, and not long after, the adventurers hauled the bear's carcass onto the wagon. Odlu flashed the commander a grin and said, "Brilliant work, just like always." Kudlo shot back, "We haven't seen each other in a year. Feels great knowing everyone's doing well." He looked at the MC and snapped in surprise an unfamiliar face. The elder hooked his hand onto the protagonist's shoulder and said, "This boy's name is Yuri." Then he let the weight of it sink in. Imagine this kid living alone in that very... Cuddle blurted out in pure shock, "Wait, he really lives alone out there in those deadly lands." He couldn't believe it, but he didn't even doubt the respected man who said it. But he could barely believe it. Thinking alone in those dangerous lands felt insane, and then he caught the squad leader's intense stare. His mind buzzing. Were they actually suspecting him? Honestly, a kid living by himself in the forest felt way too unnatural. Now he had to play it cool, cheer them up, flatter the commander, and build a real connection, so the MC grinned and told him, "Yeah, we did." He smashed the monster down so fast it barely had time to react. Yeah, adventurers are freakishly strong, and this kind of opponent demanded every ounce of his strength. Turns out the pros weren't quite like that at all. Kudo, totally lost, demanded answers again, and he just stood his ground. Saying he beat the monster, Yuri burst out laughing at his reply like, yeah, I mean, he's been attacked by a bear too, remember? It was already twice as big, but if he could still beat it, then it had to be running on fumes, so when the commander saw him pull it off, shock hit so hard it felt like twice as much. And he just kept staring, like he couldn't even finish the thought They didn't even realize it was a monster called a gambit grizzly. Those guys would still rip into any opponent like that with teeth and claws. And then he swore he took care of everything solo. The protagonist froze, totally lost, wondering if he'd just said the wrong thing. Cuddle caught his confused face, then suddenly exploded into laughter and teased, wow, what an imagination you've got. He actually dared to hope he'd someday face someone like that and win. And the protagonist was just as stunned. He didn't believe a word of it, but the commander kept laughing and said again and again that he'd slain a dragon back when he was king. When Fry was a kid, he cracked up and told the commander, so he's still the same braggart, huh? Then Cuddle snapped back, no wait, that's not what he meant. Right then, Adon, shaken and wide-eyed, blurts out the question to the MC of his. If his words were true, Yuri's eyes went wide. Who the hell was this guy? Embarrassment crushed the man's confidence. He bowed fast, apologized for his insolence, and blurted, I'm Aiden, then revealed he was the manager of this trade caravan. He jabbed a finger at the adventurers and said those were their guards, the strides of fortune, and Cuddle piped up, I'm Cuddle, then made it clear he was the commander of his own crew. Adon leaned in and told the protagonist about that brutal gambit. Now that he'd gotten it, did he have the materials to prove it? Cuddle snapped back that childish tales shouldn't be taken seriously. The hero yanked out his magic bag, gripped a bone, and told everyone, look, there's barely any skin or meat left, just bones and the rest. The manager and Cuddle froze in pure confusion, while Aiden snatched the bone, inspected it up close, and then he blurted, stunned, wait, this size, this density? He smelled it, no doubt. It was the real deal. The commander stared, jaw dropping, and blurted, that can't be. Then wondered, did he really kill it? Adon shut that down and told him it didn't matter anymore, because the valuable stuff was right there in front of them. He asked MC to sell it to him, and that's when Yuri was completely thrown. He muttered, yeah, maybe, even though he'd really wanted to turn it into soup or bury it in the garden as fertilizer. And the manager, wearing his shock on his face, blurted, what? What is he even going on about? These monster bones are insanely rare, and everyone's fighting for them. And one single piece could buy you a whole gold coin. So why is the protagonist just standing there like, wait, one gold coin? That coin in this world is worth around 100,000 yen, and he never ever saw that coming. Like, he didn't even stop to think it could be this valuable. Oh, and he can't even name the country he's stuck living in. Zero life experience at all. But hey, this is his golden chance. He's going to learn. He figured out the prices and tried to clear out the trash in his bag. So he reached in again and muttered, he's got that too. Then pulled out a dried bear gallbladder packed with medicinal properties ready to sell to a merchant and finally get rid of the excess. Used as the secret ingredient in some ridiculously expensive potions, Itaden looked like he was about to choke from shock, then burst out, what, you've got enough bear bile to choke an entire army? Let me buy it, he pleaded, and I'll pay you 3 gold coins. The MC dove back into his bag again, and the merchant nearly fainted as he blurted, confusion hit him hard, so what else does he even get? In the end, he grabbed practically everything from Yuri's magical bag, then slid into a cautious sit right beside the carton and muttered. He bought every last thing the merchant's gambling spirit had lit in him. Then Cuddle leaned in and asked if he had enough kish. The protagonist blinked in shock and admitted he had 0 money. Then Aiden begged, please forgive me, saying all his savings were locked up in the Merchant Guild's safe. Could the protagonist go with him? Confused, the protagonist asked, and the merchant promised he'd pay for the return carriage, their lodging, and every meal in the city. Food Ambush froze for a second, then leaned in with a grin. Why not? He stared at Odell like, come on, what are you waiting for? The elder said, Aiden and I go way back. He's dependable, rock solid. And then he continued, so it looked like everything would be fine. Donna shot Yuri a quick wink and said she hadn't been there either. But both of them insisted the city was absolutely amazing. And then once he snatched the money, he'd be able to buy a mountain of stuff that didn't exist back here. So the protagonist's mind lit up. Yep, if he just grabbed a bag of gold, then there's nothing worth buying here, so it'll just rot in the vault like dead weight. And yeah, life in the forest fits him perfectly. But he's got bigger dreams. He's dying to see this otherworld city for himself. He pumped the merchant's hand and promised, "Yeah, I'm in," letting the caravan know he'd follow them into the city after a bit. He kicked things into gear. Then the protagonist leaned out of the wagon with pure delight, daydreaming about the adventurer crew, the steps of fortune along with Koodle, Dahlia, Katra, Frey, and Orban. True heroes now, he had Aiden, Odell, Donna, and Marcia fighting at his side, and at last, the merchant. The merchant blurts out, "The kingdom's called Rivalin," and the MC's like, "Wait, so that's the name of this whole place?" 8 add-on was still rolling along its route when it headed for Lorenzen, the kingdom's main trading hub. Then Yuri shot him a question. "Is it the biggest in the whole country, right?" The merchant shot back, "Nope, it's second only to the capital." Donna tagged along and asked if he was happy, and the protagonist only grinned sheepishly, like, yeah, he was. He couldn't wait for it, but then it hit him. She wasn't supposed to come with them. Odell admitted she'd never stepped into a big city, so he spun it like the perfect chance so she could see the world too. That's exactly what he told her. He said that, but the elder was just cracking under her pressure. She'd begged him, swearing she wanted to go ahead because the adventurers are with them. There's nothing to fear. Suddenly, his gut tightened. His detection skill picked up monster activity, and he realized it was too late to ignore. He finally clocked at only 7 of them, and they were closing in fast, creeping in from all sides to trap them, just like wild dogs or wolves do. The protagonist blurted that their caravan had become a monster target, and Cuddle gasped, "Wait, what are you talking about?" If that was the truth, his scouts would have already sent the signal. So at that exact moment, Frey launched himself onto the From the roof of the wagon, the commander demanded answers. Then the warriors snapped back that it looked like monsters were hunting them. Cuddle stared in baffled silence at the MC, because he'd clocked them first before the Beastman even showed up, thanks to those razor-sharp senses, and he could feel the threat creeping from inside the carriage. Who the hell was this kid? Fry cursed up a storm and snapped to the commander that it was getting ugly. Fast by the stench alone, it had to be Gridwolves. Cuddle blinked, stunned. Wait, what? Just how many were there? Fry quickly counted 7, and the commander snapped. This is going to be tough. You swallowed your pride, re-apologized, and pressed him. So what are these The monsters had wolf blood written all over them, and the boy snapped back that they were wolf-type creatures. Creatures double the size of a normal wolf and 10 times deadlier, closing in from every side until they had everything cornered and trapped. They hunted their targets in packs. Normally they avoided caravans, but this time they must have sensed the kid inside. And that's exactly how they got away, and decided he was easy prey. So yeah, they'll figure something out. Neither he. They can't go outside, no exceptions for once. Donna can't either, the girl. The girl told her ally, everything's going to be okay, even though panic was already clawing at her voice. Then she went on to say that the adventurer, he was sure they could handle it, and the protagonist nodded along because just looking at Cuddle's reaction, he had to be wondering, could they really be that dangerous? If the adventurers got hurt, he knew he'd be blaming himself for the rest of the journey. Because they got attacked for his sake, he took the blame and knew he had to help no matter what, even though In Village had shown him the one problem he couldn't ignore. Becoming one with elemental magic was treated like a freak accident. In this world, he didn't doubt Donna and the others. But rumors spread like wildfire. They'd call him a monster's kid, a heretic, maybe even haul him off to be executed. And yeah, there were probably soldiers already closing in around town. And if they learned about his magic, they'd pounce the second they could. So there was only one way out. Stay out of the fight entirely. Donna watched him like she already knew. He thought he looked scared, like surviving in this forest was already too much for him. While the MC was locked in on something totally different before the battle even started, he decided to scare the one. Yuri zeroed in on his target, and then it hit him. One single strike would be all it took, and wolves always lose at the nose tip. Right there, where every nerve screams for attention, one savage hit to a weak spot, and they scatter in total panic. So he cranked the water hammer and launched his trap, and the monsters freaked out, thrashing wildly in fear, and eventually bolted into the deep woods. Koodle blurted, totally stunned, "What happened?" And Fry was also confused. She stared. Why were they bolting like that? Katra gave a quiet, thoughtful chuckle. Then the commander asked. He asked what was wrong, and she snapped back that she'd felt magic in the air, almost like something was calling to her. That kid, yeah, that boy, probably wiped them out on his own. Orban gaped, stunned that they hadn't even spotted them. Then Dahlia blurted, "How could you pull that off while you're just crammed in a van, cuddling?" "Yeah, I get it. This kid's been living out in that forest by himself for years, and only luck kept him going." Just like that. Clearly wasn't cutting it, but if he had that kind of power, then his whole Grizzly Gambit story had to be real too. Katra snapped that they had to act before time ran out, and the commander nodded because Yuri couldn't be left alone for even a second. While the protagonist's thoughts raced, he thought, thank goodness it worked. Coddle had promised his comrades he'd take care of it, but right now they still had to keep moving.